take a unique academic journey in a place where multicultural perspectives and practices create an atmosphere that will meet your highest expectations and help you reach your goals. Situated in the heart of the capital city of Indonesia, Universitas Negeri Jakarta has played an important role in developing scholarship in education, science, art, technology, and sport since 1964. Formally established as Teacher Training Institute, Universitas Negeri Jakarta has a long history in providing the state with outstanding teachers. A 1999 mandate by the Ministry of Education and Culture sparked a period of dynamic expansion within the institution, turning it into the leading state university in Indonesia that it is today.
Daya manusia yang unggul, yaitu sumber daya manusia yang kompeten, kreatif, komunikatif, dan kolaboratif. UNJ sebagai perguruan tinggi mempunyai tugas utama dalam bidang kependidikan dan non-kependidikan, juga mempunyai tanggung jawab untuk menghasilkan sumber daya manusia yang unggul. Saat ini, UNJ menetapkan dirinya melalui visi menjadi universitas bereputasi di kawasan Asia. Oleh karena itu, segala daya upaya sekarang ini diupayakan untuk mengembangkan segala potensi yang dimiliki dan berkolaborasi dengan berbagai pihak untuk mencapai reputasi tersebut.
With enlightening and elevating the nation as its motto, Universitas Negeri Jakarta offers world-class programs combined with a touch of local culture through sports, multiculturalism, local wisdom, future leadership, and entrepreneurship. Achievements in pencaksilat, gymnastics, arts, languages, humanities, social and natural sciences stem from a focus on student-centered practical and innovative teaching and learning practices have received international recognition. Our 8 faculties: Faculty of Education, Postgraduate School, doctoral programs. One graduate school and 101 study programs comprising of diploma, undergraduate, and postgraduate levels, Universitas Negeri Jakarta will prepare you to meet the demands of local and global professional industries. Warm welcomes awaits you as you become a member of Universitas Negeri Jakarta's family.
Hello, Neil Dudson, Professor Neil Dudson.
Hello.
Yeah, welcome to the Studium Generale.
Thank you.
How are you?
Very well.
Well, good morning, Professor Neil Dodson from University of Wellington, New Zealand. Good morning, Prof.
Good morning to you.
Yes, my name is Eskar, Master of Ceremony of this morning occasion. Nice to meet you, Prof.
Good to meet you all too. Glad to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, in a few minutes, we will start the Studium General. Maybe we are waiting for the Vice Chancellor of Universitas Negeri Jakarta.
He's already come.
Okay, so can we start
Yes, please.
now, Prof?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. Well, Bismillah. Ladies and gentlemen,
Recording in progress.
our honorable guests, we cordially invite you to be seated and on screen at your valuable chairs, because in a few minutes, the Studium General will be started. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
Warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Good morning.
Morning.
May peace be upon us, His Excellency, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Studium General with the theme Postgraduates Programs Towards an Internationally Reputable Institution. Broadcasting live from Bung Hatta Building, Universitas Negeri Jakarta. I am Eskar Denatara, a student of Physical Education Doctorate Program. I'm honored to be your host for today's occasion on Friday, August the 27th. Due to the ongoing pandemic, we initiate this event using virtual platform. We hope it will not reduce the essence of the Studium General organized by postgraduate programs of Universitas Negeri Jakarta. On today's occasion, we are delighted to welcome all the participants and distinguished guests, especially for our honorable speakers. The first, we have Professor Neil Dodson as keynote speaker from University of Wellington, New Zealand. Good morning, Prof. Neil.
Good morning, everybody.
Okay.
Very happy to be here.
Nice to meet you.
Okay. Thanks. And the second, we have Professor Heather Fahring as keynote speaker of panel session from School of Education, RMIT University, Australia. And the third, Associate Professor Kathy Jordan as speaker of panel session from School of Education, RMIT University, Australia. And Associate Professor Jennifer Clifton as speaker panel session from the Queensland University of Technology, Australia. And we say welcome to all participants on the Studium General who already joined us in Zoom meeting. They are the representative of study programs in Postgraduate of Universitas Negeri Jakarta. To all of you, enjoy the occasions today. Well, before starting the agenda of today's Studium General, please allow us to read the rules of the Studium General that all online participants should follow. My partner, Mbak Idam, please show to all participants. Well, this is the rules of the Studium General. First, participants are required to take part in the Studium General from the beginning till the end. Second, participants must fill in the attendance list provided by the committee, which will be shared via chat room. Third, participants are requested to mute the audio of Zoom meeting during the event. Then participants are not allowed to share screen. Fifth, it is forbidden to spread or say anything offensive to ethnicity, religion, and race. Last, participants must obey the rules of activity made by the committee. Ladies and gentlemen, now you are expected to be able to sit perfectly to hear the national anthem of Indonesia. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, next, let us start this occasion by praying according to our religion and beliefs. Of course, from your own place now. Praying begins. Finish. Ladies and gentlemen, now we proceed to speech by the Director of Postgraduate Programs of Universitas Negeri Jakarta. I would like to invite His Excellency Professor Dr. Dedi Purwana, ES Master of Business. Professor Dedi, the time is yours.
Thank you very much, Eskar. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam.
The distinguished keynote speaker, Professor Neil Dodson, Dean of Faculty of Graduate Research, Victoria University of Wellington, New Zealand. The distinguished panel session keynote speaker, Professor Peter Perrin, from School of Education of Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology, Australia. Speakers, Associate Professor Kathy Jordan, School of Education of Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology, Australia. Associate Professor Jennifer Clifton from Queensland University of Technology, Australia. The Honorable Vice Rector for Academic Affairs, Professor Siono. All Dean of Faculties, Vice Directors of Postgraduates, Head of Study Programs, Lecturer, and of course, our beloved students. Greetings from Jakarta. Universitas Negeri Jakarta, as a pedagogical university, has committed to be a reputable university in Asia. In pursuing its vision, UNJ has built international collaboration with overseas universities in many countries, such as America, Asia, Australia, of course, New Zealand, Europe, Middle East, and North America. Aims to put UNJ as the equal partners internationally. UNJ always wants to learn and benchmark to international partners. Due to its position as academic supporting unit of UNJ, postgraduate program should support the university to realize its vision and mission. Yes, it's not so easy, but it is possible. Depends on our view and perspective. If we think it's hard and difficult to reach an ambitious vision, then we will have nothing. But if we think such ambitious vision as a means to bring organizational success, it will easy for us to achieve our vision. The key is how to bring all stakeholders hand in hand to make our vision comes true. It is a challenge, of course. In realizing our vision, becoming a reputable postgraduate in Asia, we have established strong networking with overseas universities in teaching and learning, research activities, student and faculty exchange, and other academic activities. Through collaboration with the Philippine National University, for example, without 16 venues and Central Luzon University lecturer in 2015. They took doctoral program in sport education. 13 of them were graduated in 2019. Meanwhile, the 3 other students are finishing their dissertation now. ENU and UNJ Postgraduate have initiated to continue its collaboration in the near future. Another step to reach vision. This week, we are visited by expert panel from ACAS, an independent accreditation from Germany, to assess our proposal for international accreditation of 8 study programs. We also propose to ACAS for assessing 12 other study programs this year. In terms of academic services, we receive ISO 9001 and ISO 20020 certification for world-class, for the WTA. However, I believe such international collaboration, international accreditation, and ISO certification are just a little number of indicators when we question what other indicator to define a reputable postgraduate. It will be academic reputation, quality of teaching staff, campus infrastructure, visit fund, student ratio, to mention other indicators, but few. This morning event is a part of our effort to maintain collaboration with University of Victoria, Wellington, New Zealand, Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology, Australia, and Queensland University of Technology, Australia. The Studium Generale aims to share the distinguished speaker experience from those universities on how their university rank at the best position in the world. We will gain benefits from the distinguished speaker on the way the university improving the quality of teaching and learning, research activities, and community services. I hope this event will be fruitful our perspective on how the world-class universities doing their business in the noble industry. This occasion, I would like to express my gratitude to our distinguished speaker for sharing with our lecturer and postgraduate student. I believe your expertise will make us better understanding on what, why, and how we should be a reputable postgraduate in Asia in the future. Enjoy this event and have a nice day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, His Excellency, for the speech, Professor Dedi. Well, the distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, now it is an honor for us to invite Vice Rector of Universitas Negeri Jakarta to deliver the opening remarks. So, His Excellency, Professor Dr. Suyono, MSI, the time is yours.
Okay, thank you. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Studium Generale of the Postgraduate Programs of Universitas Negeri Jakarta. The Honorable Director of the Postgraduate Program of UNJ, Professor Dedi Purwana, Deputy Directors of the Postgraduate Program of UNJ, Faculty Deans of UNJ, and all participants. Firstly, I would like to express my gratitude and to welcome our distinguished speakers today, Professor Neil Dodson, the Dean of Faculty of Graduate Research, Victoria University of Wellington, New Zealand, as the keynote speakers of our Studium Generale today. The keynote panels, Professor Hither Fehring from the School of Education, RMIT University, Australia, Associate Professor Kathy Jordan from the School of Education, RMIT University, Australia, and Associate Professor Jennifer Clifton from Queensland University of Technology, Australia. It is a great pleasure to have you here today. Thank you for your sharing. Thank you for sharing your knowledge, experiences, and best practices in higher education with us. The theme of the Studium Generale today is Postgraduate Program towards an internationally reputable institution. It is aligned with UNJ's vision to become a reputable university in Asia. Ladies and gentlemen, firstly, I would like to ask you to think and reflect on what being a reputable institution means. It means commitment, integrity, sustainable quality assurance, and continuous self-improvement. Being reputable institution should bring benefits, not only for UNJ, but also for society. We want to contribute more to society by giving the best education for our students, conducting good quality research and community services that give positive impact to the global community. Ladies and gentlemen, if we want to achieve this goal, we all must work hard and work smart. I think the Studium Generale is a great starting point for us to be a reputable institution. Thank you very much, and I hope we have a insightful learning session from the distinguished speakers. Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you, His Excellency, for the opening remarks. His Excellency, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Now let's commence the 2021 Studium Generale of Postgraduate of Universitas Negeri Jakarta with a keynote speech by Professor Neil Dodson. This agenda will be led by a moderator, and let me read you the short profile of our moderator. She was born in Jakarta on November 19, 1980. She earned a bachelor's degree in Department of Physics at Universitas Negeri Jakarta in 2005. She then continued her master's studies at the University of Indonesia and earned MSc on Material Science. She obtained her PhD on Computational Physics from Universiteit Groningen, the Netherlands. Since 2008 until now, she has been a lecturer at the Department of Physics, Universitas Negeri Jakarta. Without further ado, our moderator, ladies and gentlemen, Ibu Mutia Delina, MSc, PhD. The time is yours.
Thank you, Oscar. Good morning, Jakarta, and of course, good morning for our speaker from Australia and New Zealand. My name is Mutia Delina. I will be your moderator in this fine occasion. And we have a great keynote speaker today, Professor Neil Dodson from Victoria University of Wellington, New Zealand. He will deliver his speech with topic Postgraduate Research Degree Program Experience from UK and Australasia. And this session will be divided into 30 minutes of presentation by Professor Dodson and 30 minutes of question and answer. For all of you, the audience, you may write the question on the chat room, or you may write the question in English or in Bahasa. I will translate it for you. And you may raise your hand, and then we will give an opportunity for you to give the question directly. And then, before Professor Neil Dodson delivers his speech, we will show you a short profile of Professor Neil Dodson.
So I'm Neil Dodson. I'm the Professor of Computer Graphics in the Faculty of Engineering.
Okay, what a great CV. Good afternoon, Prof. Neil Dodson. How are you?
Very good.
Good. Okay.
Assalamualaikum.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for coming to Universitas Negeri Jakarta. And without any longer, I will give the audience to you, please.
Thank you very much. So, Assalamu alaikum.
Waalaikumsalam.
And I will share my screen. So greetings to you all from New Zealand. It is a great pleasure to be here with you today. And I will speak for maybe a little longer than expected, maybe 45 minutes, but there will still be plenty of time for questions. So I'm going to talk to you today about postgraduate research degree programs. I'm speaking from Victoria University of Wellington in New Zealand, and we are part of a Centre of Excellence with your university in Jakarta. So it's a pleasure to be here. So as you saw in the video, this is me. And if I wasn't sharing the screen, this is what you would be able to see. So just a little bit more history about my background of why it might be worthwhile for you to listen to me talking about postgraduate research education. So I spent many years at the University of Cambridge, where I was professor for 5 years from 2010. And there I developed and ran a research skills program for master's students doing the master's degree in advanced computer science. I learned a great deal during developing that program, and it was very successful and well regarded. In 2016, I moved home to Wellington in New Zealand, where I took up a role as professor of computer graphics. But as a result of my experience, I was appointed in 2019 as Dean of the Faculty of Graduate Research, and I look after the 1,000 PhD students and the 600 research master's students. So today I want to split my talk into 5 sections. First of all, I want us to define what postgraduate research degrees are, and so that we all understand what we're talking about. Then I'll talk briefly about various expectations of what you might expect in a postgraduate research degree, what you might expect of the students, and what you might expect of your staff. Then we'll go to 2 sections talking about those very important people, the supervisors, your academic staff who are looking after the students, and then of course the students themselves and what support you have in place for your students and how you support them through these degrees. And I'll conclude with some final thoughts, and then we'll be open for questions. So let's start with the first question. What are postgraduate research degrees? So they have 3 key features. Postgraduate research degree is original research. So this is the first time in a student's career where they have to do something original. They actually have to do something that nobody else in the world has done before. And that is both exciting and frightening. And because they are learning, it has to be done under supervision. An expert member of academic staff must be supervising them. And it's assessed on a thesis, or as this book over here, sometimes called a dissertation. So in some countries it's called a dissertation, in some countries it's a thesis. But whatever it is called, it's a very substantial document. It'll be the biggest thing the student has ever written. And these degrees come in 2 types, either a master's degree, which is a shorter thesis, or a doctorate, normally a PhD, which is normally maybe 100,000 words, a very substantial document. So the question is, why would a student want to do this, and why would your university want to offer this? What are we trying to achieve as a university in offering these degrees? And what we're trying to do is produce people who can think. So I'm referring here on this slide to some work done by the World Economic Forum about 2 years ago. They analyzed what are the top 10 skills that will be required of people by 2025. And 7 of these 10 skills are features that a research student should produce by the time they graduate. So a research student should be able to think analytically and innovate. They should be an active learner, which means they are going to have to learn for themselves. It's no longer the professor who is telling them what to do. They have to learn for themselves. They'll have to solve complex problems. They are trying to do original work. It's going to be complicated. And over the course of doing their research degree, they learn critical thinking and analysis. They learn to be creative. They have to be original. They have to take the initiative. They have to learn reasoning, problem solving. And so all these things are needed in our employees of the future. And this green bullet on the right is really interesting. It's that a research degree is difficult. As our distinguished moderator will know, doing her research degree in the Netherlands, there are things that go wrong, and you have to develop resilience and tolerance to stress and learn to be flexible. So what we are doing through research degrees is producing a generation of people who will help the nation to be better, who will help the world to be better. That is what we want. And that's what these degrees help to deliver. Now, what type of degree is this? I want you to think about this analogy. You may think it's strange that I'm showing you a picture of people carving stone. This stone here on the right at the front is the sort of stone that's on the top of important public buildings in the UK, beautifully carved stone. And you learn how to carve stone as an apprenticeship. So you have a master carver, such as the man here on the left, and apprentice, the man in the middle. And the master carver trains the apprentice in how to carve stone. And how you train a stone carver is similar to how you train somebody for research. So when you're carving stone, you do not learn by going to lectures. You do not learn by reading books. You learn it by doing it. So the master stone carver will give the apprentice a hammer and a chisel and say, try doing this. And the apprentice will make mistakes. The master will correct them. The apprentice will learn more. And the apprentice learns by doing. And the same is true of research degrees. You learn research by doing research. It's not about going to lectures. It's not about reading books. It's about trying to do the research, making mistakes, and gradually being trained in how to do this, so that at the end of the degree, you are an independent researcher. Now, I say it's not about lectures and coursework, but there is then a question of how much coursework do we put into our research degrees? And the answers differ depending on where in the world you are. So on the top row here, if you're in the UK or New Zealand and you choose to do a PhD, it will take you 3 years of research. And that is all you do. You just do research for 3 years, or maybe 4 years, or some people take 5 years, but it's pure research. It's called a PhD. In the USA, they also have a degree called a PhD, but it's different. In a USA PhD, you do 2 years of coursework before you start research. And then maybe you spend 1 year doing a small research project or working on some small projects before, at the end of year 3, starting on your PhD. And then maybe it takes you 2 years or 3 years or 4 years more to get your PhD. So USA is a much longer process. with lots of coursework. Now, the UK has seen that maybe there is some value in this model, and they have developed an idea of a doctoral training centre where there is 1 year of coursework before the student starts their PhD. So they put a year of coursework at the start. And in New Zealand, we have professional doctorates in health and education, which lead to degrees of Doctor of Health and Doctor of Education, where you have a year of coursework, a year of preparation before you start doing the research. So these examples make it look as if the UK and New Zealand's idea of just start the PhD and give the student no coursework may not be the best idea. And the reality is that that's not quite what happens. In the UK and New Zealand, students are expected to have done, at the bottom of the slide, a 2-year master's course first, in which they do a year of coursework and a short thesis to test out whether they want to do research before they then proceed to the 3-year degree. So the 2-year master's plus the 3-year PhD now looks very similar to the USA version of the PhD. It's just split differently. So we need to realize that different parts of the world do this differently, and what one country calls a PhD might be only part of a PhD in another country. So with that, let's move on to section 2. What are our expectations? What do we expect to have to do, and what do we expect our students to achieve? So first of all, let's think about what is the desired outcome? What do we want from research degrees? And what we want to produce is an independent researcher, somebody who can exhibit all of those features that the World Economic Forum says are important in workers of the future. Now, you develop an independent researcher by giving them freedom to learn. I'd like to quote from your own Minister of Education here. In 2019, Nadiem Makarim said, "This is what Indonesia needs in the future. I am sorry, but the world doesn't need people who are good at memorizing." Now, he was talking about school children, but actually I'm thinking this is what's important for the future. We need people who can think, who can problem solve, who are independent. And we do that by giving them freedom to learn and freedom to make mistakes. So that's what we want. Now, how are we going to assess whether somebody has done this? So if we are wanting to develop the university towards an internationally reputable institution, when we're dealing with these degrees, we need to examine these to an international standard. And this is something that in New Zealand we have had to tackle. How do you examine to international standard? And we do it by requiring international examiners on our degrees. So every PhD from my university has an international examiner, somebody from outside New Zealand who is a world expert. We also have 2 examiners from inside New Zealand, one from this university and one from another university. And that's to provide some consistency and also to train New Zealanders in how to examine. So we are spreading the workload around the universities, we're spreading the workload around the world, but we need international examiners to ensure that we are at the international standard. So when we say it's a PhD from Victoria University of Wellington, that's as good as a PhD from anywhere else. And the same with your university. When you have a PhD from your university, you want it to be considered equal to a PhD from anywhere else. And this is how we make sure that happens. But in order to do that, you need the supervisors to be trained to understand what international standards are. And that may be that some of your supervisors have completed PhDs in other countries, and they are therefore able to explain what happens elsewhere and therefore train the locals. So that's what we do in New Zealand. We have some people who do the PhDs in New Zealand and some people who do the PhDs overseas on our staff. But certainly, if you don't know what the international standard is, you can't teach what you don't know. Now, I'd like to talk about, early on in this talk, I want to talk about how things go wrong in these advanced degrees. So when somebody does a doctorate, when they do a PhD, if they submit their thesis, they are almost certain to pass. At both Cambridge and Wellington, it's maybe one student or two students in 1,000 who fail if they submit. The way you fail a doctorate is that you don't submit it. It's a 3-year program at least, and there are lots of people who do not make it to the end. So maybe 200 or 250 out of 1,000 do not get to the end. So this means you have to be careful when you are thinking about how you structure your degrees. It's very important that if somebody is not going to succeed, that they find out early on. Preferably they find out in the first year that things are not going to work out. Now, for many students at my universities, it's that the student starts a PhD, they think this is a great idea, and they realize after 3 months or 6 months that this is not right for them. Something they do not like research, and the university needs to allow people to withdraw and to perhaps provide a safe way for that to happen. Maybe they get a certificate saying that they have done some diligent study for the time that they've spent with you. So that's if the student decides something's gone wrong. The university also needs to assess these students. These students are committing to 3 years of work to get a PhD. You need to assess in the first year if that's going to happen. And so you need mechanisms in the first year of doing some assessment of the student. And if the student is not capable, you then have to have a very difficult conversation and let them go. But my experience is that if you wait beyond the end of the first year, it becomes very, very challenging to tell a student they are not good enough. They have wasted a lot of their time and it becomes challenging. And if you get this right, you'll find that the people who leave in later years, it's not an academic problem. They are capable of doing a PhD. The problem is something medical, something personal, some family challenges. Those of us listening who have children or who have older parents will know about some of these challenges that happen to some of us. So the fact that this is a 3-year program and it's assessed at the end on this one doctorate means you have to get admissions right. So it's very important that your staff understand that they have to put effort into the admissions process. You can't sort things out later. You have to get the admissions process right. And at both Cambridge and at Wellington, we find that about 1 person in 25 who looks amazing at admission, they have got amazing grades, they are brilliant, do not transition well to research, and they realize research is not for them. So even if you get the admissions process right, there will be absolutely brilliant students who decide that this is not for them and they need to leave. Now, I'd also like to highlight disciplinary differences. In the video before the Studium Generale started, we saw the wide range of subjects that your university offers, and different disciplines have different requirements from a PhD. One of these, which I'll talk about later, is how free is the student to choose the topic? If it's a research lab, maybe the student is not very free at all. Maybe it is very much the professor who chooses. If it's in the humanities or social sciences, maybe the student has enormous freedom in how to choose. And that means that maybe there are different admissions processes needed. There's also a question of how much experience will your students have of those ways of research thinking? How much have they thought about how you do research? And here, perhaps in the sciences, people have not had much experience of research, whereas perhaps in the humanities, people have had more experience of critiquing and challenging received wisdom. The final thing in expectations is something that differs around the world, is if we're dealing with a PhD, do you need to have published articles in order to get a PhD? And in the UK and New Zealand, the answer is very clearly no. You are assessed on your thesis. You don't need to have published anything before you get a PhD. In some other countries, publication is a requirement to get a PhD. And you need to think about whether this is right for your university and what restrictions that might put on students if they are, for example, unlucky in how they are reviewed for publication, or if they're in a subject where publication takes a long time or is difficult. So that was some expectations, some thoughts about various things that need to be considered. Now I want to spend sections 3 and 4 talking about the important people, the supervisors, your academic staff who look after the students, and then the students themselves. So let's talk first about supervisors. So what is the role of the supervisor? In the United States, they're not called a supervisor, they are called an advisor. And that difference in language is helpful because an advisor is not a manager and the supervisor is not a manager. They are there to advise. The student is the one that has to do the work, and the supervisor is the one who provides the framework in which the student can succeed. The supervisor obviously has to provide academic guidance. So these 3 items on the left-hand side show that the supervisor is a mentor. Like the trainer in the apprenticeship, they are gradually training the student, but the student is the one who has to succeed, who has to do the work. The 4th role of the supervisor is to give access to wider context, which is to let the student, open up the student to people around the world in the field, to other researchers, to potential employers, to potential collaborators, and to allow the student to access those people so that they can develop as part of the research community. And this is all very nice. It's an advisor, someone providing a framework, someone guiding. It all sounds really good, but there is a problem. And this is the problem. The supervisor here on the left has all the power in the relationship. The supervisor is the expert, the supervisor is the supervisor and is in charge, and the students have no power. And this can lead to problems. We want the students to develop into a powerful researcher, a powerful professor in their own right. And so the professor must be able to let the students grow and develop. And some professors do not do this. Some professors treat the students as servants or as slaves, just doing what they want. And therefore the student does not develop and they do not become an independent researcher. They become too dependent on the expert professor. And let me illustrate the problem here with a little graph. This is trying to illustrate the problem. This is the course of a 3-year PhD. At the start here, we go through year 1, then year 2, then year 3 to submission on the right-hand side. At the start, the student knows very little and the supervisor knows a lot. So at the start, the supervisor is supervising, the supervisor is managing, the supervisor is training the student. But at some point in the middle of the 2nd year, the student gets to know more about the detailed subject of their PhD than the supervisor. The student is working on this every day of the week, all the time. The supervisor has other things to do. The supervisor is teaching, administering, looking after other students. So at some point, the student knows more than the supervisor. So when you get into the 2nd and 3rd year, the student is teaching the supervisor. And the challenge for some supervisors is changing from the left-hand side, where they are the expert and they know everything, to being in a position where the student knows more than them, and the student has to be let free to learn, let free to develop. Because at the end of this, the student should become the world expert in the subject of their PhD. So somehow our supervisors have to do the things on the left-hand side where they are very clearly managing somebody who knows not very much, to being very much a guide and a mentor on the right-hand side. And some supervisors find that transition hard. And that leads to another couple of problems that I have discovered in dealing with PhD students over the last decade, is that there are really serious cultural challenges. So if you are a student who is going to become an independent researcher, you have to be able to think for yourself, and you have to be able to criticize and critique and question everybody. And that includes questioning your supervisor. And you remember the diagram where the supervisor has all the power? Well, that's a problem if your supervisor has all the power. Can you develop a culture in which a student can criticize the supervisor's ideas? And can you develop a culture in which the student can say no to a supervisor? Now, in the United States of America, this is not so much of a problem. They have a culture where they train students to question things and to not be so respectful of authority. But in a culture like, say, Japan, where you are taught to be extraordinarily respectful of authority, these ideas are very challenging. But to be developed as a good independent researcher, you must be able to challenge anything, and you must be able to think for yourself. So this is something where we need to train students that it's okay now to question your professor. And equally, we have to train professors that it is okay for your research student to question you. And that can be hard. So that brings us to how do we train supervisors? This is something I've grappled with here. I have run several training courses for supervisors. How do you train your academic staff? And these are the challenges I've faced. I have supervisors will tell me, I already know how to do it. Why do I need training? And the answer is, you can always learn something new. You can always be better. You are not a good professor if you think you cannot learn anything more. But if you get past that, you get to the very true thing, I am too busy. Every professor in your university will say they are too busy. They have many, many calls on their time. So how do we make training for supervisors useful? We make it relevant. You need to make it useful. They need to see it as useful. So at this point, I'm going to direct you to a colleague of mine. Hugh Kearns is a professor in Australia, and he's done a great deal of research in how research students work and how you teach them. So he's written he has a little consultancy company called Thinkwell, and he's written a number of books for students and supervisors on the PhD process. So I'm referring you to him because he's good, but also because he addresses those questions that are relevant to supervisors. So if you're a supervisor in Jakarta, one of your questions will be, how do I recruit good students? And Hugh has a great deal of advice on how you could do that and how you effectively make sure that you get good students and that the students you get can complete a PhD. How do you then build that relationship where the student trusts you enough that they are able to question you? How do you understand those stages of the student's progress? My graph 2 slides ago, that graph showed you some parts of the student's progress. There's a lot more to what students go through. How do you understand this? Because each student is different, and almost every supervisor remembers their own PhD, but not every student is the same as you. So you have to understand how different people react. And then this, how to handle problems, is how you get supervisors to come to training. It's, if I can tell you how you handle those difficult problems, you will want to come and listen to my training course. And I can then explain the other things to you as well. So let me give you one example to finish this section, which is an example from Hugh's book. This is an example of how you start the relationship between a student and a supervisor. How do you set expectations? This is available for free from Hugh's website, so you can use this quite happily for free. And it's a set of questions that a supervisor and a student should discuss in the early stages of the PhD, probably in the very first meeting they have. The idea is that the student and the supervisor fill out this form. I realize that you can't read the form. I'll make it bigger in a minute. But the student and the supervisor each fill out the form, and then they compare answers to see if they agree. I'll give you 3 examples of the sorts of questions supervisors should ask. So at the top here, who is responsible for selecting the research topic? Is it the supervisor's responsibility to select the research topic? Or is it the student's responsibility for selecting the research topic? Now, there are 300 people on this video call. Just each of you think, in your area, who is responsible for choosing the research topic for a master's student or a PhD student? Is it the supervisor or the student or some mix? Now, there are too many of us on this call to actually try to get all those answers into the chat, so we won't do that. I'll tell you that the answer is different for different disciplines. In biology and chemistry, the answer is normally about 2. Mostly the supervisor's responsibility. The supervisor is running a research lab. There's a limited number of projects they can do. The student should choose one or from a small number of projects. In the social sciences and the humanities, often we're down at 5. The student's completely free to select their topic. Personally, I think the supervisor probably should have some input, but in some subjects, they leave it completely up to the student. So different disciplines have different answers. But the point of this exercise is not to see which is the right answer for your discipline. It's to see if the supervisor and the student agree. Because if the supervisor thinks the answer is 5 and the student thinks the answer is 1, you have a problem. And they need to know that right at the start of the project. Here's another case, number 7. Who should organize the meetings? Should the supervisor insist on regular meetings? I, in my job, would say absolutely they should. Or should the student be the one who completely decides when they want to meet the supervisor? And my own PhD supervisor did this. He let me choose when I wanted to meet him. This was a disaster because for 6 months, I didn't meet with him because I was too scared that I had not done good enough work. And it turns out that 6 months of work was not good. But if I had met with him, I would have found out much earlier. So the point again is not that there is a correct answer, but in checking whether the supervisor and students agree on what the answer is for them. So if the student thinks the answer is 1, that the supervisor should do it, and the supervisor thinks the answer is 5, that the student should do it, then no one will ever meet. They need to know at the start. And then just a third question, who writes the thesis? Well, I believe firmly that the student should write the thesis. The question is, how much help does the supervisor give? And generally, when we do this with groups of supervisors, we generally end up that 4 is the right answer. The student should do almost all the work, but the supervisor should offer some help. So that's just one tool from a suite of tools that Hugh offers for free from his website. And I commend that to you as a great place to start if, as a student or a supervisor, you're looking for resources for how to do this better. So let's therefore think about resources for students. What support do we as a university provide for our students? So far I've talked about the student and the supervisor. So far it has sounded like this is very much a supervisor mentoring a student, but the university must provide considerably more support than this. So at both the University of Cambridge and the University of Wellington, we require that there be a second supervisor for every student. For some students, this is a true second supervisor. The two supervisors work together and they co-teach the student, they co-supervise the student. But for many students, the link is with the primary supervisor, and the secondary supervisor sees them maybe once every 3 months or 6 months, and is there for when the supervisor goes on vacation, or for if there is a problem with the supervisor, because in a relationship that lasts 3 or 4 years, there are going to be problems at some point between the student and the supervisor, and the second supervisor is there to help with that. In addition to that second supervisor, you must understand how important it is that there are other students to help. Other students who are going through the same thing. These are often the most helpful people for our student, especially students 1 or 2 years further along in the program, so they can explain to the student what's going on and why things are not working and how the supervisor works. So often we'll group these into research groups, and that can be extremely useful. But each academic department should make sure that there is a group of students who can support the student. Speaking of academic departments, the academic department itself is part of the support structure. There are, of course, the head of department, who is a very busy and esteemed person, who is there to help if things really do go wrong. But there should be another academic whose job it is to look after all of the graduate students in the department and make sure they're okay, and make sure the supervisors are okay. Now, I also want to make a big claim for support staff, the administrative staff. What we have found in both my universities is that students will often tell their problems to the administrative staff. They will not tell the supervisor, they'll not tell any other academic staff, they'll tell the support staff. So having good links from your support staff to your academic staff is important. Of course, then there are people like me in the Central University who deal with the really dramatic problems and deal with the strategy, and a range of support staff that handle things such as leave of absence, extensions, and all the usual administrative work. The student also needs, if things go wrong, some support, and we have at our university, the student union has got support that it provides for students who find themselves in difficulty. And it's also very useful to provide counselling and medical services as a university, because supervisors are not psychiatrists, they are not counsellors. So they can help the student with the academic work, but there really does need to be somewhere where they can refer students who are having problems that are not academic. So you see that our postgraduate research students are wrapped around by an enormous team of people. And this is important because doing a PhD, doing a master's degree can be very lonely. And surrounding them with a group of people who can support them and letting them know that has proved very important. Now let's look at the positive side. The supervisor should not be expected to do everything themselves. The university can provide training programs for these postgraduate research students. These are not massive courses. These are often 1, 2, or 3 hours where you cover a specific topic. You might talk about the research process. I've developed a whole range of these at the University of Cambridge, where we talk about the research progress. We talk about reading and writing. And that seems crazy. Students have known how to read and write since they were 6 years old, but they have to be retaught. How do you read an academic paper? How do you critique it? How do you apply reasoning to it? How do you write an academic paper? We have to teach these skills again. How do you give presentations? Some students need work on statistics. Some students need work in experimental design. Everybody needs to know about ethics. So what I'm going to do now is just give you 2 examples from the course I taught at Cambridge, just of the sorts of things that students don't know and need to be told in general. The first of these is about the research process. Generally, when students start a research degree, they think that research is that you read other people's research, you do your research, and then you write up your research. And this linear process that you read, you stop reading, do your research, stop researching, and write up is a model that's guaranteed to fail if you try to do this. And the reason for that is that as you do your research, you start to understand things, and you have to go back and reread other people's work or read some new research, because doing your research has opened your eyes to what you don't know. Equally, when you're writing your research, anybody who's done a PhD will have discovered this. As you write up, you discover that you haven't done all the research you need, and you have to go back and redo some of the research. Certainly, that happened in my PhD, and the most important paper from my PhD was developed as I was writing up and realized there was something I hadn't done, which gave a result that was unexpected. But also, as you write up, you're trying to explain your research to somebody else, and trying to explain your research means that you have to go and read other people's research because you understand it better. And reading other people's research helps you to write your research better. So rather than this linear process, I have to tell students that this is all connected. And what this means is you need to start doing research sooner than you think, and you need to start writing it up sooner than you think. Because as you do it, you are surely going to have to go back and read some more. And as you write up, you are surely going to have to go back and do some research. And the other thing I want to give as an example is about reading. And I'm doing this with you because this is one of the massive differences between undergraduate degrees and postgraduate degrees. When you as a lecturer teach an undergraduate class, you tell them what they should read. You select it carefully. You choose your textbooks carefully. You choose the readings carefully. So when an undergraduate student reads what you have set for them, they know it's good. They know it's correct. They know it's important because it's going to be on the exam. And we will hope that it is well written because you have chosen well-written material. When somebody transitions to doing a research degree, they assume that all of these things are true of academic research papers. Academic research papers are, after all, published, and therefore they should be all these things, but they're not. And we need to train students that maybe actually that paper that you're reading is poor research, and you need to check the assumptions that the authors have made in order to determine whether this is good research or poor research, and whether you should listen to it or not. We assume, because things are written, that they're correct, but actually no, there's quite a lot of research that's published that is wrong, and maybe not totally wrong, but there are wrong aspects to it, and you need to be aware that not everything you read is 100% correct. Many students make the mistake of thinking that everything is important, but there are thousands of papers published a day, so you can't read everything. And maybe your supervisor told you to read it, but maybe your supervisor was not right that this is important. So students need to learn that something may be unimportant. And of course, some academic papers are simply impossible to understand. So students need to be aware that they have to challenge all these assumptions. And this is especially true of science and engineering students who have not been taught the skills of how to challenge assumptions, of how to critique what's written. Science and engineering students always assume that everything is good and correct and important, and we have to train them out of that. Students in the humanities and social sciences tend to be much better at questioning assumptions. And that leads me to my final point about students is about if we're offering training to research students, it's got to be flexible because science students have different needs to humanities students. And students need programs that are relevant and useful. So you mustn't force students to go on a statistics program if they're never going to use statistics. You mustn't force humanities students to go on a program on safety in the laboratory, which I have to say the University of Cambridge actually did for a couple of years. It forced humanities PhD students to go to a course about safety in the lab. They realized this was a mistake after a couple of years. So relevant and useful is what we need. And the issues that I face when trying to do this is that students are reluctant to go on these courses. We as staff are providing these courses to help the students be better researchers, but they don't want to go on them because they see it as distracting them from the research. So the way you tackle that is make it relevant to their research and useful to doing their research better. But even when the students believe this, lots of supervisors don't. Lots of supervisors believe that if the student's not in the laboratory, they're not really working. And so we actually have to train our supervisors that relevant and useful training programs are useful to their students. But again, different subjects need different things, different students need different things. So we end up having to deliver a very flexible program where students can choose what to go to. And again, at Cambridge, we required all students on the master's program to go to a number of training courses, but they were free to choose which courses were most useful for their particular research. So we come towards the end. These are my final thoughts. I have 2 slides of final thoughts. The first is that what is the big thing about postgraduate research degrees that make them challenging to implement? And it's that it's not a continuation of undergraduate. This is a different way of learning. The students are different. They are more motivated and they really do need to do work independently. And so you need to take a different approach. And that's something I find that staff all over the world struggle with. It's that you've got to think differently about how you deal with postgraduate research students. And then let's just go back to what are we actually trying to do with these postgraduate degrees. We're trying to create a context in which we are producing thinkers and problem solvers that exhibit all of these aspects that are going to be so important for the future of our nation and the future of our world. Because at the end of the day, once somebody's finished one of these degrees, they get a certificate, and the certificate is the university certifying that this person is capable of doing independent research. And that's what we want. We want these people to go on and to be enormously successful contributors to our nation and our world. So with that, I will stop. Thank you, and I will be happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you, Professor Dixon. So, Bapak Ibu, Professor Dixon have shown you the step for the research and what is the supporting system and how to manage it. Professor Dixon, we have several questions here. I'd love to ask the person give the question directly to you. The first one is from Bapak Teguh Triano. Would you like to ask your question directly? Bapak Teguh, are you here?
Maybe host to unmute the audiences.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I will read it for you. UNJ as a university based on educational heavy instead of engineering or technology heavy. What special strategy in research should be taken in order UNJ still can take role to provide competency human resources that can be complete in year 2025 based on the top of 10 skill mentioned? Thank you. A tough question, I guess.
So, well, first of all, if you are, what special strategy research should you take? So what you're doing is you're trying to give the student the freedom to make mistakes and to learn. So you start by training your supervisors, training your academic staff to be able to take somebody from a position where they know nothing about research, and you train them in those research skills, and gradually you let them free. And I think I give a good example of my current PhD student. He's now done 5 experiments. These are social science experiments he's doing. And the first one took him 6 months to develop, and he needed lots of support and advice. So I had to give him lots of advice. By the time we get to experiment 5, he knows exactly what he's doing, and he's much, much more confident. So it's ability of the supervisor to let go. In terms of how you, in an education-heavy context, I think the questions are, how do you train students to question the material they are given? It's that, so in science and engineering, it's quite easy because there's always just one right answer. In other disciplines, how do you get students to have the confidence to explore the space of ideas? So you can actually start this at the undergraduate level by giving students the confidence that they're going to get good marks if they express good ideas. It's not about expressing the professor's idea. It's about expressing their own ideas. And this is hard. It's actually harder to mark. It's harder to assess. It's much easier if there is one right answer. But if you can build that into your higher level undergraduate, you then have people who are prepared to then go on to do research.
Thank you. So training staff and then give a research skill to everybody. And of course, the main thing that the student have to be an independent researchers. Yeah. Yep. Thank you. We follow to the next question. May I? The second question from Indah Wira. Dear Professor Jackson, let me introduce myself. My name is Indah, a doctoral program student of Applied Linguistics. If it must to be present in number, what percentage of supervisors' roles should be in help or supporting student research? Thank you. How many percent?
How many percent of the supervisor's effort? So
yeah,
when you start, the supervisor is going to be putting in 50, 60% of the effort to try to help the student understand how to do research. And the idea is that by the time the student gets to the end of their second year, the supervisor is putting in maybe 5 or 10% to just check that everything is okay. So it's like, I don't want to say it's like training a child how to ride a bicycle, but when you start, there's an enormous effort from the parent to help the child to actually do things. But you hope the child will learn enough that they can do it on their own. So it's like all things in life, a lot of percentage at the start, and then just checking at the end. And then when they graduate, it's got to be down to 0%. So once the student has graduated, the supervisor is no longer there. So the student must have 0% help. So the supervisor needs to take it from high level down to low level as they go through. So you should expect lots of help in your first year, and then maybe not so much help in your second year. And then maybe by the third year, your supervisor expects you to do everything. And you should expect that and not be upset that your supervisor seems to be not spending as much time. They have other students. Yes.
New student. Yes, thank you. So it will be degrees, yeah? And at the end, you have to be an independent researcher again, 0% supervised from the supervisor. Thank you. Next question from Ego Widoro, Educational Technology Program. Dear Professor Daxon, I have several questions. The first one, Indonesia use leveling of national qualification framework to difference the thesis and dissertation, make distinct, I guess. What is the distinctive difference between both in New Zealand? Is there any difference, the dissertation and the master thesis in New Zealand?
So in New Zealand, it's very confusing because people use the two words to mean the same thing. So they just, the two words mean the same thing. And we differentiate by what degree it is. So we have a doctor's thesis is a level 10, a master's thesis is level 9, and a research project is a small project is a level 8. So our levels 9 and 10 are called the same thing: thesis, master's thesis, and PhD thesis.
Okay.
So yes, your country uses these two words to have specific meanings, and this is one of the problems when you're trying to do international comparisons. You've got to make sure that the words mean the same thing overseas as they do in your country, otherwise you get really confused. So always check the language.
Always check the language.
That's actually a really good question. That was a really good question to clarify that when I say thesis or dissertation, I mean exactly the same thing. In Indonesia, they mean different things.
Yeah, because of the level. Okay, thank you. Actually, I have another question. The second one, what is the culture better to develop for the supervisor? Criticize or do everything in or combination of both?
So what a student and supervisor need to do is develop a relationship where when the supervisor suggests something or says something, the student feels able to question that. The student must be able to question the supervisor. And I have had a dreadful example of where this goes horribly wrong. I had an Italian supervisor and a Chinese student. So the Chinese student is very respectful of the Italian professor. So the Italian professor, every supervision, is giving out lots of ideas for research, lots and lots of ideas. He has many, many ideas. And the Chinese student thinks he has to do all these ideas and never questions this. So after 6 months, the Chinese student has a very, very long list, of jobs he has not done. And he comes to me absolutely depressed because he cannot do all these things and his supervisor is horrible. And the supervisor, when I ask him, says, "Oh, I was not asking him to do these things. I was just suggesting ideas, but he never ever questions them. I don't know why." And so this is a supervisor and a student who had not talked about how they related, and their cultures just clashed. So I think it's best if the student is very respectful of the supervisor's ideas, but is willing to question them. So you can be respectful and question. It's really bad when the supervisor thinks they are always right, because that squashes the student and they don't become an independent researcher. But it's also dreadful if the student thinks that they are always right, because students are not always right.
Interesting answer. Yes, yeah. So in Indonesia, we have a culture as well. So, the senior have a lot of idea, and the junior have to follow it. And now you give a new insight. We will try to do that here and apply it. So Bapak Ibu be independent researchers ya di sini ya. Okay, next question come from Sally Altar. Dear Professor Daxon, I'm Sally, Magister student of Education History. Did you mention in UK and New Zealand the PhD student no need to have a published research? I'm afraid I misunderstood. Could you please restate it? How about the Magister student? Because in Indonesia, we have a regulation from the government. We have to publish at least one international publication, and then we can pass the exam.
Yep. So I was aware of that because I've been asked by the Indonesian government to certify that we do not have that requirement. So it is true that in the UK and in New Zealand, you do not need to publish. However, the examiners do need to say that the work could be published. Excuse me. So, and I think in the sciences, it's fairly easy to publish, but in some of the humanities, it's actually quite challenging. Some of the time scales from when you submit to when it finally appears in print can be extremely long. In my field, the publication length was actually 2 years. From the day you submit to the day it came out to be published, could be 2 years or longer. And that's a very long time to wait if you submit a paper in the second year of your PhD. So it does, that ruling from the government does restrict you to not being able to offer PhDs in certain areas where publication is very slow or where a really substantial amount of work is needed to create a publication. But I can't change Indonesian government policy.
Okay, thank you. For me, myself, when I take my PhD, I have to publish to publication as well. Yeah,
I'm very
different
embarrassed
rule
to say
in
that
different country, right?
In my PhD, my really good publication was not published till after my PhD. So
okay. Yeah. May I continue to the next question? We have 10 minutes left.
Yep, good.
Yeah. The next question, Professor Jackson, could you tell us how to be a good doctoral student in submit the proposal and become the way it should be one by university? I don't get it, sorry. Can you get it?
So there are two things this could mean. One is, how do I make sure the proposal that I submit in my application is good?
Mm-hmm.
And the other is, how do I make sure that my proposal I submit during my first year of my PhD is good? So the first one is, when you're trying to get into a PhD program, a lot of the important things are that you have a good academic record already. So if you're getting top grades in everything, the university is going to be very happy to look at you and will want to make sure that your proposal is reasonably sensible. And to make it sensible, maybe you contact one of your professors to check that this is good. One of the people who might supervise you. It's always a good idea to try to contact the people who might be supervising you to see if they're interested and to make sure that your project matches their interests. The other question, which is, you've been admitted to the PhD, but your university has a process where you have to refine your proposal during the first year. That's a sense of talk to other PhD students, talk to your supervisor, see what other people have done. I hope I've answered whichever of the questions you were asking. I hope that has answered it.
Yes, thank you. I guess so. The last question. My name is Nilu. My question is, what are the criteria used at the Victoria University of Wellington in New Zealand to define the postgraduate student is already as critical thinker and problem solver throughout their thesis or dissertation?
So this is, there are 3 places where we formally assess a student. So they are when you apply for the program, at the end of your first year, and when you submit the thesis. So when you apply for the program, we look at your academic record. If you have top grades and everything, that looks very good. It probably means that you're already good at critical thinking and problem solving because you've been able to pass all those exams really well. We also look at your references, where that's academic people who know you actually assess how they've observed you. This is things that you can't see from your grades. It's It's getting people who've taught you to say, yes, he's really good at critical thinking, or yes, she's really good problem solver. And then what we always do these days is we always interview people to talk to them and see how they deal with things in an interview. Do they understand the issues? So that's what we do at the admissions. And essentially you do the same thing at the end of the first year, that the student produces a proposal and you read through that and say, has the student been able to think critically about this problem? For example, do they simply quote other people, or do they critique what other people have said? Have they solved some problems? Have they done some experiments? Have they analyzed these experiments? So you look at that at the end of the first year, and again, the student gives a presentation, the student is personally interviewed. So it's very much a personal process. One of the things I love about postgraduate research students is it's so personal. It's so much about the person. You're not one of 300 people in the lecture theatre. You are a person who is being dealt with by another person. And it's that one-on-one relationship. It's what makes it so exciting for the professors, that they get to deal with really clever students one-on-one. And it's what's great for the students is you get to deal with a clever professor one-on-one. So we deal with things, you're assessing this one-on-one, you're looking to see evidence. And if there are problems, you're actually, because you're dealing with an individual, you're able to address that individual exactly where they are, if you're a good supervisor.
Thank you. So you can become independent, good researchers
yes.
with a good supervisor. Okay, thank you, Professor Jackson, for sharing with us today. Do you have a closing remark for us before we close this session?
I'd like to say thank you very much for inviting me. My university and your university are in a collaborative agreement, and we will continue this relationship with you, which we're very happy about. And I'm really pleased to see your university tackling these problems of how do you move towards an internationally reputable institution so that you can be a shining star for your nation and produce people who go on to help both your nation and the whole world. It's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Thank you
Professor
very much, Prof. Jackson.
Ya, we will continue ya. Bapak Ibu, izinkan saya untuk summarize this session. So the postgraduate program is an independent student and independent researcher. They have to learn from themselves, solve the problem independently, and work with criticize with the subject with creativity, originality, initiative, and good thinker. Jadi ini adalah kuncinya. But before we close this session, Professor Jackson, would you like to take a picture together? We would like to add documentation by our admin. Please help us. Mas Eskar.
Mbak Ida, my partner, please help us to take a picture with Professor Neil Dodson.
Okay.
Okay.
1, 2, 3.
Give your best smile.
Once again, please. 1, 2, 3. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Professor Jackson, thank you for your sharing and see you
very
in the
much.
next
Thank you, Neil.
session.
Thank you, Prof.
Okay, Bapak Ibu, terima kasih. This is the end of the first session. I will give back the floor to Eskar. Back to you, Eskar. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Well, thanks Ibu Mutia Delina for leading us the first session of our Studium General. And once again, we would like to express our special thanks to Professor Neil Dodson for the inspiring keynote speech. Thank you, Professor Neil Dodson. Well, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, Before we continue to the next agenda, we would like to show you the video profile of Universitas Negeri Jakarta. Please enjoy.
Entering the gate of knowledge through Universitas Negeri Jakarta, you will experience a unique atmosphere where multicultural perspectives meet in academic practices. Located in the heart of the capital city of Indonesia, Universitas Negeri Jakarta concerned with the environmental issues to promote urban and green campus. As one of the best public universities in Indonesia, Universitas Negeri Jakarta offers you with world-class programs enriched by the touch of local wisdom and supported with high technology facilities and disability accesses. Universitas Negeri Jakarta has played an important role in developing education, science, art, technology, and sport since 1964. Universitas Negeri Jakarta serves students of diploma, undergraduate, and postgraduate programs. They are deployed in 8 faculties and 1 postgraduate program. Teaching and learning activities are delivered in joyful atmosphere and meaningful interaction to promote student-centered and autonomous learning. For that purpose, Universitas Negeri Jakarta develop laboratory schools where various educational innovations are tried and tested to get best practices. In the sphere of sports sciences, modern sports stadium has been built, equipped with modern and high-tech sport facilities. To achieve Universitas Negeri Jakarta vision to go global, various international programs has been conducted comprising such as student mobility program, lecturers exchange program, and various international seminars. In line with this, Universitas Negeri Jakarta keeps on developing both international program and infrastructure facilities to achieve Universitas Negeri Jakarta vision to be reputable university in Asia.
Ini ya? Apa ini Pak? Ada tangan Pak Deddy itu ya?
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is now an honor for us to directly move to the next agenda, which is the panelist session. And to lead this agenda, we will invite our second moderator. Let me read you the short profile of our second moderator. My partner, Mbak Idan, please help me to show the full of profile of our moderator. Thank you. Well, she was born in Jakarta, July 30, 1980. After obtaining a bachelor degree in education at Universitas Negeri Jakarta in 2003, she then migrated to Australia to complete her academic degrees, starting from postgraduate diploma in science education with distinction in 2007. Then she obtained a Master of Science education with distinction in 2008, until finally achieving the highest academic degree, PhD in science education. And all of these degrees were achieved at Curtin University of Technology, Australia. She is very active in conducting research whose articles have been published in various international reputable journals, and her expertise makes her often invited as speaker at many national and international events. She is also a reviewer in various reputable international journals. Extraordinary. Well, without further ado, our proud moderator, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Yuli Rahmawati, MSc, PhD. Dr. Yuli, the time is yours.
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity, Pak Eskar. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat pagi, Bapak Ibu semua. Good morning, the speakers and participants. Ladies and gentlemen, we will proceed to the panel session speakers with three outstanding speakers: Emerita Professor Heather Fehring, Associate Professor Kathy Jordan, and Associate Professor of Jennifer Clifton. Before we start the lectures, I will read short biography of our three speakers. Emerita Professor Heather Fehring is Emeritus Professor in School of Education in Design and Social Context College, RMIT University. She has held many academic and leadership positions throughout her career. Has bachelor degree education coordinator, director of higher degree by research in Design and Social Context College, RMIT University. Associate Professor in Assessment and Learning and Deputy Head Research and Innovation in School of Education, managing research and HRD candidates and supervisor with the school. She has continually lectured in literacy course across the range of programs. Her prolonged passion to be an excellent learning and teaching scholar has been acknowledged by 10 teaching awards, including citation for outstanding contribution to student learning in 2070, and culminating in the RMIT Vice Chancellor Distinguished Teaching Award. Heather was the first female to receive this prestigious award at RMIT University. Professor Fehring has successfully supervised 23 PhD students. She also involved in several research projects, including the professional practice model pilot in Universitas Negeri Jambi in Indonesia, and also several research including with Australian Institute for Teaching School Leadership. As Emerita Professor in 2021, Heather continues to supervise PhD students, mentor staff for promotion, undertakes consultation for overseas university and for the global development portfolio at RMIT University, and is constant reviewer for international journals. For most recent publication, she has been published the journal article with probably in Indonesia context, the implementation of the coaching approach to professional experience, CAPE model in Indonesia, initial teacher education from the participants' perspective. And I move to the next second speaker, Associate Professor Kathy Jordan is an honorary university fellow at RMIT University. She has been associate professor and deputy head of higher education in School of Education at RMIT. She has strong research interest in initial teacher education, including the changing policy context that is shaping practice and importance of work, integrated learning to pre-service and teacher development. She is currently writing about the development and implementation of innovative approaches to school-university partnership, the use of coaches in supporting pre-service teacher on practicum, and third space theory. The last speaker, Associate Professor Jennifer Clifton, is an experienced educator, researcher, and national standing in professional experience. She has been associate professor in the School of Teacher Education and Leadership at Queensland University and Technology in Australia. Jen is well renowned for alternative models of professional experience based on school-university partnership, which focuses on the alternative model of professional experience based on school-university partnership, which focuses on shared responsibility and employability of the graduates. She has listed several national and statewide projects, including leading in development of coaching approach to professional experience. She has a comprehensive research profile of researching with industry in the fields of school, university system, partnership approaches to professional experience, third space, and health education. That's all for the CV for our outstanding speaker. Without any further ado, we will start the session. We have 1 hour session for 3 speakers. followed by question and answer. And for participants, please ask your question. You can ask directly or put on the chat box, and then it can be Bahasa and English as well, and then I will translate it for Bahasa. Thank you so much. Please, Professor Heather, times is yours.
Wangga. Abi, boleh ngeklik uang?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
I can't.
Wait.
Do you want me to share the screen, Prof?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yes, that'd be great, because I can't see my two colleagues.
Yeah, they are already here. Yes.
Hiding somewhere.
Yeah, we will put the pin, should be. Please. I will do the slide is with me. Just show me when you move the slide. Thank you.
So if it's all right with you, when I just say next, then you press the button at your end.
Yes,
and,
yes, sure.
And we'll be synchronized.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation today. It's a great pleasure for Jen and Kathy and I to be here with you at this wonderful meeting, because I came in early and I was listening to Professor Dodson. Kathy and Jen and I have been asked to deal with quality assurance in student-teacher education. So my colleagues have already been introduced, so I won't go backwards, I'll go forward. So next. In this session today, we had planned to consider, discuss, talk to you, cover 3 different aspects of quality assurance in student-teacher education. One is the entry quality assurance, initial teacher education entry requirements and expectations. I will deal with that in a moment. 2, during. So what are the quality assurance in student-teacher education during a student's program in a particular university? And Jen will deal with that, the professional experience during initial teacher education. And then what about graduation? So graduating with a teaching performance assessment and entering the profession. Kathy is going to deal with that area of quality assurance. So without any further ado, we'll do next, and then we'll do next. Right, I'd like to start by addressing initial teacher education requirements and expectations. But first, if I could just provide a bit of a snapshot overview of the Australian education context. Over recent, quite a long time now, there's been questions raised about the teacher workforce requirements. Internationally, there's a concern about quality of teaching workforce. There have been issues related to the attractiveness of teaching as a career. This, of course, relates a great deal to salaries. Issues related to developing teacher knowledge and skills, which is very important, as you all well know. Issues related to recruiting and selecting and employing teachers. Issues related to keeping effective teachers in schools. So in Australia, we have had a number of national reviews arguing that the quality of teaching workforce is inconsistent and in need of reform. 2 of the more significant ones have been the Teacher Education Advisory Group, we know it as TMAG. They published their report called Action Now, Classroom Ready Teachers in 2015. And this report made a number of significant recommendations in relation to initial teacher education and teacher education across the board. The other significant report was what we call the Gonski Review 2.0. And it was a report about the growth to achievement and the achievement of excellence in Australian schools, and was published in 2018. It also made significant recommendations in relation to schooling and to teacher education. Next. Now, just as a bit of a snapshot, so that you've got a picture of where we are, Australia has a complex educational organisational structure, not as complex as Indonesia, I might add. The Australian government has a National Education Organisation Department of Education and Training, known as DEET. DEET is responsible for national policies, programs related to early child care, early childhood education, school education, higher education and vocational education and training, and international education and research. So DEET, the Australian government DEET, is responsible for these areas across the whole country. Then Australia has 6 state and 2 territory educational organisations, and they are responsible for the implementation of educational policy and procedures. So Australia's DEET is the macro view of policies, and then the meso view or the micro view is each state and territory implementing the educational policies in relation to teacher education. So next. Right, there are 2 in relation to quality assurance standards, just a couple of things. We have the Australian Professional Standards for Teachers. AITSL is responsible for that, the Australian Institute of Teaching and School Leadership. Both Jen and Kathy will talk more about this later on. But the Australian standards, no, sorry, back one, please. Yeah, the Australian standards, as you can imagine, standard 1, teachers must know their students and know how students learn. Teachers must know the content and how to teach it. What is the curriculum content and how to teach it? Standard 3, planning for and implement effective teaching and learning. Standard 4, create and maintain support and safe learning environments in schools. 5, teachers, initial teacher education, teachers need to be able to assess, provide feedback and report on student learning. Teachers need to be able to engage in professional learning. And standard 7 is engage professionally with colleagues, parents, carers, and the community at large. So that's one area. Next. We introduced and this is one of the first things that I will deal with, we introduced what is the Australian Qualifications Framework. This is a policy for regulating qualifications in Australia education systems. It was first introduced in 1995. A second edition was issued. The picture on the image on your right is the second edition. It was released in 2013, if you wanted to look it up. And in 2019, the AQF was reviewed, and we are now waiting for the third edition to be released, but it has not been released yet to my knowledge. So, excuse me, the AQF, it underpins the national system of qualifications in Australia, and it encompasses universities, higher education and vocational education and training. It's an agreed policy of Commonwealth, that's the Australian government, state and territory ministers, and it has 10 levels in it. Because some of you here are PhD students, if I could just give you a little picture of AQF, which for PhD students in Australia refers to level 10. Now, I heard Neil Dodson before refer to the levels and in relation to his education system. But so the AQF level 10 is what PhD students aspire to. Level 10 is the programs that when we deliver them, we must meet these expectations. So for level 10 PhD, there are 3 broad areas. Knowledge. A graduate at this level, that's level 10 PhD, many of you that are on this session today, this level will have systemic and critical understanding of a substantial and complex body of knowledge at the frontier of a discipline area of your expertise. So you have to have knowledge. PhD programs must provide PhD candidates with level 10 knowledge. PhD candidates have to receive, learn, be provided skills, and graduate at this level will have expert, socialised, cognitive, technical and research skills in the discipline area of their interest. So they must be able to engage in critical reflection. Neil mentioned this before. A level 10 PhD student must be able to synthesise and evaluate information. PhD level 10s must be able to develop, adapt and implement research methodologies to extend and redefine existing knowledge. when I was the director, one of my teaching areas was research methodologies. So I would be teaching PhD students. They would do a research methods course with me, and I would be teaching them various research methodologies so that the area that they were interested in, or the question which they wanted to research, they would be able to choose the most appropriate research methodology for their question. PhD students, level 10, must be able to disseminate and promote new insights to peers in the community. And I heard one of your, the moderator before, ask the question about do PhD students have to publish before they can actually pass their PhD? Well, that is the criteria: disseminate and promote new insights to peers in the community. And PhD level 10s must be able to generate original knowledge and understanding to make a substantial contribution to the discipline of their area. Then they must be able to combine the knowledge and the skills, and they must be able to apply it. And really what that refers to is designing research studies, so that they can design them, they can execute them, they can choose appropriate research methodology, then they can write about them, then they can disseminate information. Now, as lecturers, both Jen and Kath and I have all been involved in working with PhD students to develop this set of criteria at the level 10 standard. Right, next. Now, so the AQF is one level of quality assurance. Another quality assurance measure: students in Australia in years 11 and 12 undertake various senior secondary certificates. They all have different names in each state and territory, would you believe? So don't be confused if you look at one university and you think, what is that name? The years 11 and 12, they all states and territories sit external exams except Queensland, but they all have different names for their year 11 and 12 certification. Victoria, we call ours the Victorian Certificate of Education or Victorian Certificate of Applied Learning. New South Wales call theirs Higher School Certificate, and the Northern Territory, for example, they call theirs the Northern Territory Certificate of Education and Training. So it's the same, it's a year 12 certification, and statistically moderated, they produce an ATAR score. So this enables year 12 school leavers to, when they obtain their ATAR score, it allows them to apply for any university across Australia with the ATAR score to see if they can get into that particular program. Now, just for an example, initial teacher education, many universities in Australia advertise that the ATAR entry score for initial teacher education is 70. However, the actual number of students who get in and what their ATAR score ends up being, there's usually a range at most universities. So that depends on applications, number of places, funding, etc., etc. So, for example, Curtin University in Western Australia, the school leavers, the lowest ATAR there is 66 to 70. The James Cook University in the Northern Territory, the lowest school leavers ATAR was 61 to 65, so below 70, but depending on, as I said, number of applicants, places, funding. RMIT, our lowest ATAR, school leavers ATAR, is 51 to 55, but we don't take many at that range. And then there's the University of South Australia, their lowest ATAR is 71 to 75. So you can see that the ATAR score, although a quality assurance measure, and although many universities advertise 70, who actually gets in, there's a range which universities take, and that depends on, as I said, numbers, places, funding, etc. So they, with their ATAR, they might decide they want to go to the Northern Territory. They might want to go to Queensland, QUT with Jennifer. They might want to go to Western Australia. So with their ATAR, they look at the courses and the programs and they say, can I get into that program because that's where I really want to go? They make an application and then who knows, the luck of the draw. Now, another quality assurance measure, the next. Another quality assurance measure, and as I said, Jennifer and Kath will talk more about Australian professional standards in a minute, but Program Standard 3 refers to non-academic and academic measures, what we call the LANTIDE. It is the literacy and numeracy test for initial teacher education. And this was introduced as a quality assurance measure so that when students graduated, they had to have reached or passed this LANTIDE test. It has been quite controversial here in Australia, but it exists and our students must pass it in order to be registered in any of the state and territory teaching authorities. Next. What is it? The Literacy and Numeracy Test for Initial Teacher Education. It is a test mandated by the federal government, either the Commonwealth or the Australian government. All teacher education students must complete and pass this test in order to work in the teaching profession. All students enrolled in an initial teacher education course, either undergraduate or postgraduate, will be expected to sit and meet the test standard prior to graduation. Some higher education providers have also required students to sit the test as part of their entry requirements, but not very many. In addition, some states and territories may require successful test results, LANTIDE test results, in order to complete their final practicum to be registered or employed as a teacher. Next. It was first introduced and effective as of 2016. It consists of two components, one literacy and one numeracy. The tests involve 120 to 130 items. It takes an hour and a half to 2 hours to complete. No, back one, thank you. And the test is computer-based and involves a combination of multiple choice and constructed response questions. The students have to pay $196 to sit both components of the LANTIDE test. And a student may research each component of the test, the LANTIDE test, twice if the standard is not achieved for the first time. However, if you fail 3 times the LANTIDE test, you are in big trouble in relation to trying to get registered as a teacher in any state or territory. So, in summary, for my component of the quality assurance, three aspects in relation to initial teacher education requirements and expectations. 3 major quality assurance measures. The AQF, Australian Qualification Standards framework, which is related to the program expectations, what lecturers like Jen and Kath and I have to provide and what the students have to achieve in relation to that program, so that we all know that a PhD student across Australia has had or has achieved the criteria for level 10. The ATAR, which is the school leavers, the year 12 results, the ATAR, which is a statistically moderated score based on the students' exams, either internal in Queensland or external in all the other states and territories. And then the LANTIDE. Students have to pass the literacy and numeracy test for initial teacher education. And that's the third of the quality assurance in relation to entry requirements and expectations. Next is young Jennifer.
Yeah. Thanks, Heather, for that.
Thank you, Heather.
So Heather was talking about before our students enter and the sort of quality assurance that happens before a degree has begun, and what hoops our students have to jump through to be able to become a teacher or be entered into our degrees. I'm going to talk briefly about the quality assurance that happens during their degree, and I'm going to focus on professional experience, which is field experience or placement. It's when our students go out, like your students do in Indonesia, and they get a supervising teacher and they practice their teaching skills and knowledges in a school base, and that is then graded, and then they come back to university. So can I have the next slide, please, moderator? Thank you. So as Heather was talking about the AITSL, which is our Commonwealth regulator, they accredit our program. So before I can teach our masters or our bachelors or our teaching degrees, my whole program and all the units or courses has to go to AITSL, and they decide if it's up to standard or not. And I have to show 6 program standards. So we have to show where our students meet the learning, why things are set out the way they are, what's in our degree, and there's a program standard just for professional experience, so when they go out into schools. And it outlines things like how many days must you do in schools. So in Australia, the minimum number of days for a postgrad, which is like a master's of teaching, is 60 days of placement. If you are an undergraduate doing a bachelor, then it's 80 days of placement. We have to show how we are developing partnerships with our schools that we work with, how we're supporting those supervising teachers to take our students, what we've got in place to support our students if they're at risk while they're on placement, and also all the assessment we use. So the assessment is those final report that the teacher fills out at the end of a placement to say whether they have passed their placement or not, as well as a theoretical assessment normally that gets them to practically think about the theory they drew on during that professional experience. So I'm going to talk a few things today about that program standard number 5, because it affects their placement, and it's often they'll do 3 or 4 placements during their degree. So it is these quality assurance checks by industry while our students are out on placement. Next slide, please. Thank you. So a little bit more about program standard 5 is within each program standard, there's often 3 or 4 subsections. So the first subsection is that you need to have formal partnerships with schools or prior to school settings, so early childhood centres. So this needs to be a formal partnership with every school or school site that I work with. And in Queensland, they've made it really easy in that we have one agreement with the 3 sectors of independent schools, Catholic schools and department schools. If I was in different states, I'd have to have individual agreements with each school that I work with, so between the university and the school. And I also have to show how I am managing this partnership or this relationship and how I'm going to facilitate partnerships. So in a university I worked at previously at RMIT with Heather and Kathy, we had a coaching approach to professional experience. So that was based around having a partnership with about 8 to 10 schools who were taking large numbers of our students, and they were working in a partnership to teach some of our content on site. We then tried that in an Indonesian university as well. They took on some of those same principles of getting a coach to come in and support our students on placement. And you can read about that in a recent article we've just released. But the partnerships is a really important part of proving that you've got that quality assurance, so that these partner schools are signing off these students that they're ready to enter the profession, and that we've got these really good links with schools. Next slide, please. The other thing that we need to show is, like Indonesia, we have standards that our teachers need to address. So these are our 7 standards that our teachers have to show, and our pre-service teachers, our student teachers, also have to show. So there's this shared language between schools, us, and industry around the standards that we're looking for. So on professional experience, much of these standards are what are being assessed, so that the school knows what these standards are, we know what those standards are, and the student knows, so that when we go in there, if a student isn't up to standard, it often means they're not meeting some of these standards. So it might be that they're having issues because they don't know how to plan lessons, for example. So we have a shared language around quality and what quality looks like because of these Australian professional standards for teachers. Next slide, please. And again, there's an emphasis on partnerships twice. So the Australian government is really trying to make sure that we have that relationship between universities and schools and even the system, education system. So they're looking for those partnerships. And you need to have, one of the requirements for us is that we have practicing teachers who teach into our programs at university. So that's different to some other ways that other countries are operating, where you need to have a PhD. In Australia, there's this recognition that it's also important to have, yes, those people that understand the theoretical aspect of it, but also to have practicing teachers that teach into the university. And I've put a link there to a paper that was written about the coaching approach to professional experience in that Indonesian teacher education context. So you can see how we took some of the ideas that we had for partnerships because of these AITSL, or these requirements of quality assurance, and how it operated in Indonesia. Next slide, please. The other way that we are trying to raise the quality of our pre-service teachers is in Queensland. We have around 9 to 10 universities that operate in Queensland. So what that means is there's a lot of difference between, as Heather was pointing out, that, you know, if you have a lower ATAR, you might go up to James Cook University. If it's a higher ATAR, you might come to a different university in a metropolitan area. But we want to make sure that every teacher who enters the profession are entering as ready and supported, and that they are able to then teach at a really high quality, regardless of what university you came from. So in Queensland, there's an agreement that every student on their final placement has the same final report. So the universities and the Department of Education and Queensland College of Teachers and the independent sector and Catholic sector all came together and developed a final report. So every student that graduates from a Queensland university has the same final report that they're being assessed against. And the current move is, we're thinking in the next initial teacher education review, which is happening as we speak in Australia, we'll see a same final report across all states of Australia. But at the moment, this is the model that Queensland has. But it means that regardless of, you know, a school might have a student from QUT, University of Queensland and Griffith University all at their school doing placement, but they're all being assessed against the same standards. And you'll have a look on the next slide, please, moderator. This is a page from that final report, and you can see there that there's some examples of what teachers should be looking for, and they have to, they must have a tick in every box or every section, and they must be either at graduate level or exceeding graduate level. So if a student has below the line, so it's developing, or below graduate level, they actually can't graduate. So in every student needs to be graduate level or above to pass overall, and to be let into the profession to graduate. So these, you can see there that there's APST, that means Australian Professional Standards for Teaching 2.2. So if we looked at the first line, and what that is these are all things that the marker or the supervising teacher is looking for, but it's linked to those Australian Professional Standards for Teachers. So, and that document's available online if anyone wants to have a look at the full 8 pages. Thanks, moderator. Next page. Thank you. We also have at QUT quite strict quality assurance around how much teaching a student does on professional experience. And that's not just teaching. We want to see how much planning they're doing, how much reflecting they're doing, how much observation they're doing, and that they're expected to attend meetings. So this is what a final placement looks like. And you can see there in the last 3 weeks of their professional experience, they're doing a full load. So every day they are working, this one's a primary, every day they're working as a primary school teacher for 3 weeks. So at the end of that, they will then do their final report. So we have lots of checks along the way to make sure that they're meeting the minimum standards and quality. Next slide, please, moderator. When you're a final year, the other quality assurance check that is required of us is we have to show how our students or our pre-service teachers are having an impact on the learning of the young people that they're doing placement with. So it's not just about our students passing placement or passing professional experience. There's also a requirement that our students from QUT and from every university is having a positive impact on learning of the young people. So at the end of their final report, there's 2 questions that the supervising teacher has to answer, and that is around how much of a positive impact did my pre-service teacher have on your students, and around the ability of the pre-service teacher or the student teacher to make professional judgments. And these 2 questions are here because we want industry to give feedback to us as a university about how our students are going on placement. We then use this data to remain registered as an accredited university. So in our next accreditation cycle, we use this data to say our students are having a positive impact on students as a reason to keep accrediting us. So you can see that quality assurance is like a cycle. We get accredited, and then we have to show how our students are having a positive impact to be accredited again in 5 years' time. So it's quite a complex system. Moderator, can we just go to the next slide? But you can see there that there's a lot of quality assurance that happens during placement, during their degree, and a lot of that happens on placement. So it's not just passing your theory, there's also a lot of quality checks that happen in that practical side as well. So I'm going to pass on to my colleague for the last little section, which is talking about what happens during the end of their degree before they enter the profession. Thanks, Kathy.
Hello, thanks Jen, and good afternoon to everyone. I suppose what we're trying to say collectively here is that in Australia there is a lot of change happening in relation to initial teacher education. That over the last 5 years or so, there's been many reviews and reports that have looked into the quality of not only programs that we deliver, but the quality of our graduates who then go out into schools. And as in other countries, such as the United States and the United Kingdom, there is concern that our graduates, those who complete our programs, don't necessarily have the skills to be able to get out there and teach. So the Australian government and state governments have been increasingly concerned about what is happening, and this has then resulted in much greater standardisation across states and territories. What Jen was talking about, what Queensland is doing is not necessarily the same as what is happening in Victoria, where I live and teach, but there's greater efforts being made by the government to ensure that there is consistency in these standards. So there is now much more greater regulation, and we see that in relation to a teacher performance assessment that I'm briefly going to talk about today. Would you mind turning to the next slide, please?
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so we've been saying that now teacher education programs have much greater regulation. And Heather and Jen and myself have all pulled up this same slide, which says that all providers, whether it's UT or RMIT, we have to make sure that our programs meet these 6 standards, okay? Heather has spoken a little bit about Program Standard 3 and some of the requirements now regarding entry, and that includes the score or the rank that you need to have in order to get into a program, as well as a literacy and numeracy test. I think you can all guess why the government is putting these measures into place. In the first instance, the government is perhaps concerned that the rank or the entry score into teacher education isn't high enough, or maybe isn't consistent enough across Australia. So that's why there's moves in relation to the rank. There's also concerns around the literacy and the numeracy levels of graduates, that perhaps they don't have the knowledge and skills that are needed when they are teachers in schools. So hence there's been this additional measure, the Landtype test, which Heather spoke about. Program Standard 5, which Jen spoke in detail about, drawing upon her QUT experience, was talking about professional experience. So the checks and balances that occur when students go out in schools, to then try to make sure that once students have finished their placement, they then have the skills to be able to teach effectively. Okay, I'm going to be talking about Program Standard 1. Okay, and this is the introduction of what is called a teacher performance assessment. Could you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. Okay, so internationally and in Australia, there's all these concerns about the quality of teacher education programs and whether they give a guarantee that graduates of programs can go out there and teach, that graduates can teach in metropolitan areas, that graduates can teach in rural areas, remote areas in Central Australia, and in quite diverse communities. In the United States, they also have a considerable emphasis on a teacher performance assessment. And I've got a couple of dot points there that just give a couple of the details on the type of assessment that is happening in many states in the US. So, for example, pre-service teachers need to have a portfolio that shows 3 to 4 days of teaching. So that's all their lesson plans showing how they have had impact on student learning. They also have to include 2 10-minute videos that demonstrate their teaching prowess in the classroom, as well as their larger curriculum plans and examples of student work to show the quality of the work that is being produced as a result of their teaching. The one that scares me is the next dot point. That's the 25-page narrative analysis, where all pre-service teachers then have to write more or less a large essay where they talk about what they're trying to do with learning, their learning goals, their curriculum, how they're meeting various curriculum obligations, how they're assessing and how they're giving student feedback. In the US, this teacher performance assessment is actually outside the control of the initial teacher education providers. It's outsourced, and they have trained scorers who assess student work, and this is by a paid company who do that, okay? So the US has gone to one sort of, it's developed one large model around teacher performance assessments. Australia's done something similar but different. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Okay, so in Australia, all our pre-SEAM service teachers to graduate from the programs need to produce what is called a teacher performance assessment. And this means that they need to demonstrate that they can meet that set of Australian professional standards for teachers that Heather first introduced. That was the slide around teachers need to be able to plan lessons, they need to know their content, they need to know their learners, they need to assess learning, things like that. So what happens now is the government has introduced this formal assessment. So it's like a guarantee that our pre-service teachers, when they graduate, they can do all these things. So the TPA, it must be a reflection of teaching practice. So the pre-service teachers typically produce a series of lessons that demonstrate their teaching skills and how they assess, or how they might do a diagnostic assessment, how they do formative assessment, how they do summative assessment. And what they do is students then collect artefacts of their work and they write up a reflection of that. So the TPA has to be a valid instrument. It has to have clear measures to be able to show what students can do and can't do in relation to their standards. And it has to be reliable so that markers are able to mark consistently. And I know at QUT, for example, where there might be 600 students in a program, there are many assessors who are trained up to assess students' work. Could we go to the next slide, please? We actually thought it would be a good idea to screen this video. The video goes for about 8 to 10 minutes and it talks about the TPA, its history and what it tries to do. So what we'll do in a moment is we'll play the video and then we three speakers will have finished our formal part of this panel and then we'll open up to questions. And I have been noticing that questions have been popping up in the chat. So if you wouldn't mind pushing the play button, please. You'll need to make sure that the sound is coming through.
It is sound is not coming through.
No, it's not coming through for me.
Ini mungkin Mas Lutfi kali bisa
minta tolong.
bantu Mas Lutfi atau Mbak Idam. Mbak Idam. Host.
Well, my partner Mbak Idam or Mas Lutfi.
Bu Yuli, stop sharing aja dulu. Ini jadi copy ininya, linknya.
Ya. So Katia, we will use another slide because I'm not sure it didn't come out. I already shared the sound as well.
That's okay. Heather and Jen, are you able to, are you okay now to go to questions?
Prof,
yeah.
Prof Arita mau coba share. We plan to try it first.
Okay. Okay.
Wait.
Slide keberapa itu ya? 20 ya?
Ya. Bentar, aku.
people sometimes ask me, what is my favorite style of meditation? Is it
Silakan Pak Lutfi jadinya.
Pak Lutfi.
meditation that originated from India? Is it Christian Gnostic meditation? And I always say my favorite
Ada yang share?
Bu Yuli?
Now I want to tell you about this sign.
Nggak bisa ya?
Bisa?
It's a direct quote.
Nggak bisa.
Nggak bisa.
Every day and every way, I'm getting better, better, and better. Now, Mind Valley publishes so many.
Katie, probably we just move to the next slide, and then when it is.
I think you just had to skip the ad.
Yes, yes.
Bring it up
and then,
again. We'll just try it once more. You just had to skip through the advertisement. It was almost ready to go.
Oh, oke. Tadi siapa yang share, Prof. Arita? Silakan di-share. Itu habis advertisement ininya. Oke. Langsung dari YouTube-nya aja. Iklannya di sana, ya. This is it.
From 2019,
this one? Okay, good.
all pre-service teachers undertaking their final professional experience will complete a new performance assessment. This reform will support graduates to be classroom ready. The Teaching Performance Assessment is designed to connect classroom practice with academic performance in initial teacher education, ITE. The Teaching Performance Assessment, TPA, will be rolled out in all ITE courses by 2019. The TPA is a national reform driven by 2015's Action Now Classroom Ready report that recommends more rigorous assessment to better prepare graduates for classroom teaching. The 2018 Gonski report also calls for a continued focus on rigour for classroom readiness. In recent years, significant initial teacher education reforms have been undertaken to ensure graduate teachers are ready for classroom teaching. TPAs are the next step in this process. TPAs are designed to create self-regulating, self-reflecting and resilient teachers. Through the collaboration and commitment of our schools and ITE providers, we will deliver to students classroom-ready teachers. While assessed by the ITE provider, TPAs are conducted in schools and are being introduced to create consistency and rigour in assessment of graduate-level performance, better prepared teachers who can use evidence of learning, enable schools to enhance support for beginning teachers by providing more certainty in expectations, strengthen student learning supported by formative assessments, build assessment-capable teachers, and build public confidence over time, bringing overall benefits to the teaching profession. TPAs are built on authentic teaching practices that classroom teachers are already familiar with. Evidence-based learning is at the core of the TPAs, and ITE providers assess pre-service teachers' ability to practice this. TPAs use principles of good assessment, validity, reliability, and fairness. What role will supervising teachers play in this new reform? Supervising teachers in schools are the connection between TPAs and professional experience for pre-service teachers. Supervising teachers remain key to introducing pre-service teachers to the profession through guidance and mentoring, shaping classroom experience, supporting workforce planning, ensuring confidence of parents and school community. Supervising teachers will continue to assess pre-service teachers using the Australian Professional Standards for Teachers at the graduate level, alongside TPAs that will be assessed by ITE providers. The TPA is supported by evidence of practice collected by pre-service teachers during professional experience in the final year. Pre-service teachers' initial classroom experience sets the course for their professional career. Key to creating classroom-ready teachers with the TPAs is allowing pre-service teachers to have experience with evidence-based student learning through access to opportunities to collect and use a range of age-appropriate data evidence of student learning, opportunities to be responsible for planning and teaching a sequence of lessons in one learning area subject, allowing to focus on whole class and individual students' learning needs, access to data and evidence to support planning for individual learning needs. Supervising teachers and schools can share a wide range of experiences with pre-service teachers across the school communities in different contexts to build capability and classroom readiness.
Thank you. So we are already at the end of the session. So it is the information from Katie. Do you want to end the session first?
Heather, do you want to say something to just conclude this off before we go to questions? No response from Heather. So would you like to be able to, I'm
Please
not sure
unmute,
how you
please
want
unmute,
to
Prof. Heather. Unmute the speaker.
Heather, did you want to unmute and say anything?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, look, because of the time, I think we should go straight to questions.
Okay. Yeah. So it is the reference. The participant can have a look the documents that has been shared by the three speakers. Thank you so much. So I stop this share. So we already have the question in the chat box, and if anyone would like to share, I would like to give the impression for three speakers. They already spent 1 hour exactly the time for three speakers. Thank you very much for managing it very well, Heather, Katie, and Jennifer. And anyone would like to ask question? You can raise your hand. Bapak Ibu ada yang mau bertanya? Kalau tidak, saya mungkin bacakan yang di chat box ya. Okay, so we already have the question in the chat box. So the first question is from Bapak Muhammad Fahmi. Bapak Muhammad Fahmi mau tanya directly? No, okay. The question from Bapak Muhammad Fahmi is, please she asked permission on how to determine the standard of good educational method for a campus. What is the standard of achievement for educational institution? Please, Heather or Katie or Jennifer would like to answer it.
We have to unmute. Yeah, Jennifer's now unmute. I think that's a Jennifer and Kathy question because they've been heavily involved in the accreditation of programs in the university.
Yes, please.
So Jen, probably you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Go, Jen.
Yeah, it's a good question. Good for who? So good for students, good for prac, good for theory, good for, good's a very interesting word. How the AITSL or how the Australian government has determined what is good is by those program standards, that you're meeting all of those program standards, that it's integrated, that we're using teachers, that we've got support in place, we've got high standards of our students. So in terms of what is good from the Australian government point of view, then that's those program standards that we did show. In terms of what individual academics do, often it's based on their own research or their own experience. So there's no one method that you have to use. Lots of universities use different ways, and even in a single university, the lecturers will use different educational methods. I'm not sure what you mean by the standard of achievement, but if you don't get accredited, if you don't meet those standards set out by AITSL, then you can't run your program. So until you've got that tick, that your program is at standard or your degree is at standard, then you can't run your program. You have to wait until you get that accreditation tick of approval before you start teaching it. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, Jennifer. So the accreditation itself, it is with the level or only it is accredited, something like that?
Yeah, so it's just, have you met it or not?
Okay.
So there's not, are you very good, good or low? It's just a competency type based thing where if you've met it, then you get a tick. If you haven't, it's a cross.
Okay, thank you. Bapak Pak Muhammad mudah-mudahan menjawab ya. Jadi mereka harus diakreditasi dulu, kemudian baru bisa menjalankan program ya. Salah satunya melalui akreditasi untuk menjamin tadi ya pencapaian institusi. Okay, thank you very much, Jennifer. The next question is from the teachers. How do the teachers in Australia carry out learning during the pandemic situation?
I'm happy to take that one as well if you'd like.
Go, Jen.
Because I work so closely with a lot of schools approach this very differently, and it's very dependent on what state you're in. So in Queensland at the moment, our schools are open. Our students are expected to be in school. If you're over 12, the students have to be wearing masks and teachers need to be wearing masks. And we're hoping that after today, we go back to no masks in our high schools. But we've just had a recent outbreak here in Queensland. However, if you're in New South Wales or Victoria at the moment, they're in lockdown.
Yeah.
So they are learning remotely. And what that looks like is, again, different in every school. Some schools, especially our independent and private schools or those with a higher socioeconomic status, have kids, they're expecting their students to turn up in their school uniform, log on to Zoom at the time that they would normally have their classes. But there's some schools that their students may not have access to the correct technology. So they're printing out materials and you drive past in your car and you get delivered your materials that you work through at home. And teachers might just have a short drop-in session with their students, say for like 20 minutes a day if they're primary, or once a week if they're high school, just to see how everyone is going. But every school and every state is teaching differently at the moment.
Yeah,
Can I just add a couple of comments? Heather and I are in Melbourne, so we are in lockdown. We have a curfew at night. So we can't leave our houses after 9 o'clock at night. When we leave the house, we have to wear a mask anywhere outside, and we can only leave the house for a couple of reasons. That is for emergency shopping, to be able to get food for the house, to have 1 hour's exercise a day, or to be able to go and have a COVID test, or to have a vaccination. And RMIT, all classes have been online for about 18 months, more or less. So what happens now in higher ed is that most of the classes start with a Zoom of a lecture for an hour or so, intermixed with lots of interactive activities so that our students can go away, do some reading, talk to one another through the various apps that are available for them to do so. So the real challenge in higher ed, as well as in school, is to try and make sure our students are getting positive and productive learning experiences. And there is real concern now that students are not necessarily getting those great experiences, and there's real concern around student well-being. So at the moment, I'm working upstairs in my house at home. My husband is downstairs. He is working, and my son, who is 20 at Melbourne University, he is doing a tutorial at the moment because I can hear him. Right. So that is the situation with COVID at the moment. Did you want to add something, Heather?
Only that my work now is with postgraduate students, so it hasn't affected my work with my students a great deal at all, because my PhDs, we Zoom or we use an alternative mechanism to RMIT Teams. So we do a lot of Zoom. They email me their chapters, I read them, I send information back, then we have a chat on the Zoom, etc. So in reality, the only minus is that we don't get together and have a cup of coffee and a bit of a chat and a bit of a chin wag, but the actual work and the quality of the work has not been affected a great deal with my PhDs.
Thank you, Heather, Kathy, and Jen. I need time. Probably I would like to speak in Bahasa first for conclude your talk regarding the answer. Jadi Bapak Ibu kondisinya sama dengan di Indonesia, tapi memang setiap negara bagian beda. So Melbourne in Sydney already locked down. It is the condition is locked. Ya, okay. Yes. Jadi di negara bagian Melbourne sama Sydney sekarang sedang lockdown. Jadi mereka juga boleh keluar cuma buat beli makanan, emergency dan sebagainya ya khusus. Dan pembelajarannya teaching and learning-nya sama di sekolah dan di universitas gitu ya. Nah untuk Katie misalnya mereka aktivitasnya semua juga menggunakan Zoom ya. Kemudian tadi Heather mention tentang MS Teams juga untuk mahasiswa Pascasarjana misalnya mereka konsultasi melalui Zoom, kemudian mengirim draft juga lewat email, dia tinggal periksa dan sebagainya, memberikan feedback. Jadi kondisinya sama dan tidak sama setiap kalau di sekolah dan perguruan tinggi juga bervariasi yang digunakan. Itu Bapak Ibu. Thank you very much. So we will move to the next question. It is one person asking several questions from Rizda Aprilia. Good morning for all the speakers. I would like to ask about the professional capability at 4 career stage in the standard profile benchmark. The question is about how to recognize the professional growth of teachers throughout their career if the teacher was from other country. Our recognition is the same with the local teacher or it might be different. Probably Indonesian teacher would like to come to Australia for the level of standards. Probably that question first. Thank you.
Who wants to answer?
Okay,
I can
thank
answer
you.
if you like. So there are 4 stages and a lot of it's based on experience. So if you are a graduate teacher, you're meeting those graduate standards. And then you use those standards even when you are a teacher. So if your principal is making some judgments about whether you should get promoted or keep your job, or you're setting your own goals for what you would like in your teaching that year, they have to be based around those Australian professional standards for teachers. They're often used if you want to become a highly accomplished teacher. So you go through a process and every state is different. So if you're coming to Queensland, then you go through the Queensland College of Teachers and they determine if you're a highly accomplished teacher or not. And often that's based on a portfolio of work that you submit. But it is different in every state. And it's really about how you move from graduate teacher to highly accomplished to principal stage. So it's if you're an Indonesian teacher coming over here, they would recognise your experience, and you would have to get registration with like Queensland College of Teachers or Victoria Institute of Teachers, depending on which state you wanted to be working at, and they would determine your starting salary. But it's really one of those things, it's just to guide your practice rather than to determine your pay.
Is there any requirement of English, IELTS, for example, for being a teacher?
Yeah, so every state will have a different IELTS requirement, but yes, most of the time there is, yes.
Oke, Bapak Ibu, jadi silahkan mungkin ada Bapak Ibu guru yang ingin pindah ke Australia, jadi ada prosesnya, ya stage-nya, dan setiap negara bagian itu berbeda. Atau mahasiswa kita yang lulusan pendidikan masuk ingin menjadi guru di sana juga ada prosesnya. Nah, salah satunya juga ada permohonan, misalnya IELTS-nya skornya berapa, gitu. Oke ya, so we move to the next questions. It's still the same person. What is the common mistake for all candidates from a board that might make them get rejection during all process for getting all Australian professional standards for the teachers. So seems to be she would like to go into Australia. Okay, please, the common mistake.
It's not a mistake that would stop you from getting registration if you've got a qualification and you meet all the requirements. What we do find, like with our graduates teachers, a lot of them work on the Australian Professional Standards as their goal setting. A lot of them work on the behaviour management area, and that's often where they have identified they've got some weaknesses. But you would never get rejected because of the Australian Professional Standards for teachers. They're just there to guide what you do and what you aspire to do, rather than keep you out of the profession.
Tidak ada rejection ya, tapi mungkin memenuhi kriteria atau tidak, dan setiap negara bagian Bapak Ibu beda. Jadi kalau di Victoria ada standar lagi, di Melbourne juga mungkin di Western Australia beda-beda, jadi setiap standar ya. Okay, and then next, do you have something?
Could I just comment on
yes,
the
please,
postgraduates?
yes, please.
If you were an Indonesian student wanting to come over here to study, say, a PhD, well, then you would go onto the form, find all the applications, find what you were required. Say you didn't meet the one of the 4 or 5 different measures of English, Cambridge, online, IELTS, etc. If you didn't meet it, some universities and some postgraduate departments would ask you to do a preliminary course. So they would ask you to enroll in English as a second language course to get your English up to speed to meet the requirements for entry into that particular university.
So what is the score right now for PhD?
Look, that depends. Here at RMIT, it's 6.5 to 7.
So it's depend on the field of study?
Oh, that's a good question, but I don't know the answer to that. I only know teacher education. So I only know the PhD students that want to come in and study with, say, myself or Kathy or here at RMIT. And I know our School of Education, our score is 6.5, used to be 7, but then they lowered it to 6.5. So I don't know, in Queensland, for example, I don't know what your PhD, IELTS or English equivalent is, Jen.
Not sure, Heather.
Yeah, it's quite different.
Yeah.
Thank you. Jadi Bapak Ibu, kalau untuk yang mau masuk S3 ataupun mungkin S2 ya, S3 yang tadi disampaikan ada requirement IELTS-nya ya, ada range-nya antara 6,5 sampai 7, tapi mereka juga punya prosesnya ya, stage-nya kalau misalnya tidak memenuhi IELTS tadi gitu. Okay, thank you. So I move to the next question. Do you have something like training package or competency standard for teaching activities? If yes, could we get the documents? Probably the open access document that can be accessed, like the competency standard for teaching activities.
Yeah, so there's no training package as such or competency based, but I'll put up the link to the AITSOR website, which is what we use to determine our standards. And you can go in and have a look at our, there's a lot of tools and resources that you might find useful in that area that talks about these standards and how they meet and how you might demonstrate them in your own practice.
Okay, good. Do you share on the chat or?
I've just added it to the chat.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you so much, Jen.
Nice.
So, okay, the next question. Good morning. Please introduce. My name is Lu Putu Putrini Mahadewi. So, I'm a student in Department of Educational Technology. I would like to ask a question to Katie. Is the question to Katie. What strategies do you use to promote the value of fairness for learning evaluation, particularly during learn from the period of time? So during the pandemic situation, what is to promote the value of fairness in learning evaluation?
Jen, can I ask you to answer that one? Because I'm not actually teaching at the moment.
Okay.
Because I'm in lockdown. Jen will be able to answer that more. Sorry, Jen. Right.
That's okay.
Look, it is really hard to be fair to everybody during this time, and every state government has tried to address this differently. So I know in Victoria, for example, they loaned out laptops to young people, and then after the first lockdown told those young people that they could keep those laptops. In Queensland, we created a television network or a television station where young people could go on, and if they couldn't get their resources or they couldn't get access to the internet, then there was a TV station that they could go to called Learning at Home. You turned to that channel and you could get some literacy, numeracy, humanities, and even now, if you Googled Learning at Home, I'll put it in the chat as well, you can go in there and see some of the sorts of resources that were available to both teachers as well as young people who may not have been able to have access to internet or stable internet or any sort of laptop. So they tried to be fair by looking at access during that time, because we know that there's some kids that have got good access to both parents, to resources, to ICT, and then those that haven't. So they tried to make sure that there was lots of ways to access that learning so that it was a little bit more fair.
Wow, that's great. Thank you. Jadi Bapak Ibu, dalam assessment agak sulit ya masa pandemi ini untuk jadi fair ya. Cuma salah satu pertimbangan fairness itu adalah connection. Jadi mungkin getting access-nya juga ada yang terbatas, juga harus kita pertimbangkan. Itu salah satu contohnya. So I move to the next question. So we still have 15 minutes. Is that okay? So there is several question that has come through this chat. So what kind is from the Professor Arita, our Vice Director of the Postgraduate School, what kind of examination applied in order to guarantee that the teacher can achieve the professional standards which is already established? The father, if the teachers cannot pass the test, is there any opportunity for them to take exams only or to join the professional course as whole? Is there any standard of professional related to the professional standards? Is there any standard of personality? So I will guide one by one.
I might. Okay, yeah. I'll start this one.
Yes.
But I'll start at the end.
Yes.
What happened? Heather spoke about how, in order to gain entry into undergraduate teacher courses in Australia, a student's ATAR score, in other words, their rank, their score that they get at Year 12, is used for entry. But as well, the government has been concerned that providers are trying to attract people into teaching who have the skills for teaching, so that people have resilience, that they are able to be caring with students, that they are going to act with integrity and be moral in their decision making. So what happens now is that we have another test for entry that all providers must have some non-academic measure. So an ATAR is an academic measure, so it's a score. At RMIT, we use like a behavioural test that is taken online, and students hear some videos that talk about various scenarios, and they have to write a response to these scenarios. So this is testing their capacity to solve problems, to be able to show empathy for people, to be able to show that they appreciate diversity, inclusivity, and have resilience. So I think I've answered that question. Right? Another one there was around the Australian Professional Standards 7, around engaging professionally with the community. As Jen and Heather have said, while we have the same set of standards that apply to graduates as well as early career as well as leading teachers, right? The way you interpret that is a bit different according to level. Okay, so with a graduate teacher, we would expect that they demonstrate a willingness to participate in the profession. We would expect them to be able to show that they, for example, are going to join teacher subject associations, and that perhaps they are going to get resources from these specific sites or draw upon texts that, for example, come from the Maths Teachers Association. In Australia, it's very important that all teachers continue to engage in professional learning. It's the idea that we are always learning and that we always need to examine our practice, reflect on our practice, and seek to improve our practice. So that's why that ongoing professional learning is weighted as much as being able to assess students or being able to plan for learning. Okay, I'm jumping back to the previous one about what happens if you can't meet the standards. That's what the teacher performance assessment does. So the TPA assesses a student's capacity to meet those standards around planning lessons, assessing student work, catering for diverse learners, using a range of teaching strategies, demonstrating sound classroom management, being able to use technology safely, being able to use technology so that it enhances the curriculum. So the students, when they do their teacher performance assessment, need to be able to demonstrate that they meet those standards. If they don't meet those standards, they don't graduate. You must meet the standards. So it's now a high stakes assessment that is completed in the final year of your course, of your program, and it's based upon what you do out in professional experience. So while you're out in your school, you will collect some data about your students. So what you might do is you might test them on their knowledge of particular aspects of maths, right? You would then analyse the data and you would be able to work out, for example, that maybe 5 students don't understand these concepts, three don't understand this. The whole class doesn't understand this bit. So using evidence that could also be evidence based upon student reflections of their own learning, or when you analyse an artefact. So as an English teacher, I analyse an introduction and I might look at, okay, who can use topic sentences? Can the students have one key idea in a paragraph? Can they use evidence? So I would collect all this data and then based upon the data, I would design a series of lessons, right? I would then put those lessons into practice and I would then demonstrate the impact that I've had on those students. In other words, that I've improved their learning as a result of what I've done during my placement. So that's what the TPA is. Right? It's meant to be a guarantee that pre-service teachers, in order to graduate, can actually teach. So they can use assessment, they can give feedback, they can plan, they can differentiate lessons, they can use a range of teaching strategies, they can use technology, they can perhaps work with colleagues. That's what the TPA does.
Conduct the assessment. Yeah.
Can I just add something there? on Kathy.
Yes.
The ATAR, remember, the ATAR in Australia is the tertiary ranking, but you can do years 11 and 12. You could be 18 years old and do 11 and 12, or you could be 55 and do years 11 and 12. So that ATAR is a school leavers ranking. As Kath said, we have non-academic entry requirements, so that, for example, we are really keen to have First Nations people or Aboriginal students come in to become teachers, because we have so few. So with alternative selection procedures, universities can say, we're going to bring in 5 Aboriginal teachers who may not have an ATAR of 70. We're going to bring in 5 teachers who were trained in Afghanistan who are now refugees, because we want to have some teachers in our schools now to deal with our refugee students from Afghanistan. So there are non-entry requirements that can be applied to people who don't have the school leavers ATAR. That is just only one measure, one quality control measure for entry into initial teacher education.
Oh, so you have even the teacher in teacher education, the age more than 40, something like that?
Yes.
When I was doing year 12 about 100 years ago, we had a young mother come and join our classes in the secondary school. Now, we were all 17 or 18, and this lady must have been about 35. She felt like she was our grandmother, quite frankly, but she was doing the year 12 with us, and that's, as I said, 100 years ago, and she got her score, and because she wanted to do a particular course. So I don't know how old the oldest person is.
Yeah, I think
the oldest PhD student in Australia, I think, and Kathy, you can correct me, I think the oldest PhD graduate in Australia was 80.
Yeah.
I think that was Kathleen Hill, wasn't it, Kath?
Don't know the name, but
she did a PhD in education. I'm pretty sure Kathleen Hill, who wrote a book on students writing. I'm pretty sure she was 80 when she finished her PhD.
Wow.
So she would have got in. She would have got in on mature age entry requirements, which, and Kath and Jen could correct me here, but mature aged entry, they look at your life experience, your background, other requirements. You can say, gee, that would be fabulous to have that person in our schools teaching.
Yes, it's the experience. So I need to summarize first in bahasa. Jadi Bapak Ibu ini luar biasa ya. Jadi siapa saja bisa menjadi guru ya. Bahkan yang usianya mungkin tadi mencontohkan sampai 50 ya, tapi asal bisa pas, bisa melewati tadinya ATAR assessment ya. Jadi itu tentang assessmentnya, sebenarnya itu general di Australia, tapi ada tes behavior khusus. Tadi Katie menyampaikan tes behaviornya, misalnya problem solving, menghargai perbedaan siswa, kemudian inclusive education, kemudian daya juang juga diukur juga gitu ya. Nah kemudian ada lagi nanti di pendidikan guru itu ada tes namanya TPA ya, teacher performance test itu, teacher performance assessment itu sampai memastikan calon guru kita itu bisa perencanaan, penilaian dan sebagainya, dan itu sangat high stake ya. Jadi benar-benar harus lulus. Kalau tidak lulus tes itu ya tidak lulus jadi guru. Kemudian bahkan itu di dalam performance test itu juga dia diminta mengumpulkan data dari tes siswa-siswanya, kemudian dianalisis. Dari hasil analisis misalnya siswanya tidak paham dan sebagainya, itu harus dia mengkonstruk pembelajarannya itu dari hasil analisis tes yang digunakan kepada siswanya gitu. Jadi benar-benar memastikan bahwa yang sudah lulus dari teacher education itu memang sudah siap untuk mengajar di sekolah dan bagus gitu kualitasnya. Oke, itu saja. Thank you so much. It's giving the complete overview on the standard. So I have probably one more question. So the last question. So it is quite long as well. It's from Dewi Sartika. Dewi Sartika in childhood education. I have heard from one of my friends graduated her master in Indonesia, and when she moves to Australia and taught there, she says her master degree from Indonesia was equated as the same as 3-year diploma. So undergraduate in here is 4 year, and then when she moved to Australia, is only recognized as 3-year diploma. I just want to confirm about it, whether it's true or not. If we get our master in Indonesia and want to develop our professional career in Australia, are we still qualified? Will this master degree that we get from our country be recognized and or approved in Australia? Thank you.
I'll answer that one because I've been answering in the chat. So it depends on what your degree is, where it's from, and which state will recognise it and how they'll recognise it. So best to always check with the teacher registration for whatever state you plan on teaching in. I've just put up Queensland, Victoria, and New South Wales. Yeah.
Okay, good. Jadi silahkan Bu Dewi, itu semua linknya kalau Bapak Ibu tertarik mencoba gitu ya, mau menjadi guru di Australia, itu semua proses deskripsi dan sebagainya, assessment yang harus dilalui. Thank you very much, Prof. Heather, Prof. Heather, Jennifer, and Katie. Probably I will little bit close the summary. When read through all the quality assurance in teacher education and the process, we recognize that the process itself have to be really rigorous process, and then with the quality assurance, we would like to make sure the teacher education will produce the teachers that are professional, and then it will be improve our education as a whole in the nation and also in the global world. Thank you very much. Probably Prof. Heather, Jennifer, or Katie would like to closing the statement before we close the session.
That's you, Heather.
Perhaps I can close. First of all,
you're
thank you.
the emerita.
Oh,
you're
yes.
the emerita.
Just quickly,
there are very few Emerita Professor of Education in Australia. Very few. And
Yes.
Heather is one of them. Very highly esteemed.
Oh, Kathy, stop it. You actually get appointed
That's outstanding.
You actually get appointed as an emeritus professor, but
Yes.
emeritus is male. So
Okay.
all of us girls, we call ourselves emerita because that's the
Okay.
female version. So that's why I'm an emerita. First of all, thank you. You've been a fabulous audience. You've been so patient. The questions have been great. So on behalf of Kathy, Jen, and myself, I thank you very much for this invitation. And I thank you very much for your interaction with us, because Zoom sometimes can be so difficult.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Heather. So Katie, Jennifer would like to say something.
No, Heather does such a good job, but I would just like to thank you as moderator for keeping us on time and answering those questions and facilitating. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer.
And
Katie?
thank you, of course, for the moderator for being able to take in what we are saying in English and then being able to translate.
I'm really worried.
That's quite a skill. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
very much, Heather.
Okay, so I give to the host, please, Pak Eskar. Thank you so much, everyone.
Pleasure.
Thank you so much, Ibu Yuli. And once again, thank you very much for all speakers in the panel session. What a great insight, information, and enlightening to all of us. And Professor Heather Fehring, Associate Professor Katie Jordan from School of Education, RMIT University Australia, and also Associate Professor Jennifer Clifton from the Queensland University of Technology, Australia. Thank you so much, and God bless you all.
Pak Eskar, do you want to take a picture for the speakers in the slide? Yes.
Of course. Please, my partner, Mbak Idam, help us to take a picture with all panel speakers.
Okay. So actually, it's not take a picture; it's take a screenshot.
Take a screenshot. Sorry.
It's all the photo. No, just kidding.
Okay.
So all the photo is the screenshot.
Okay, 1, 2, 3. One more, please. 1, 2, 3. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, we also thanks to our great moderator, Ibu Dr. Yuli Rahmawati, MS GPSD, who led the panel session very well. And with the end of the panel session, we are at the end of our meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, we believe that opportunity should be made and chance should be pursued. So by the completion of this occasion, we hope that you have gained insightful and enlightening experience